Welcome to SteeleWatching, which is a podcast for Remington Steele fans. My name is Sara, and I am on vacation. Hosting.
And I am Eric, and I am not on vacation. I've been working too much.
That's what happens when you're an overpaid teacher. At least that's what they tell me. I'm still waiting to be overpaid, but yeah.
What can I say?
Yeah.
You know, there's always a cardboard and a marker and street corners.
I could do that.
There you go.
I could do that. I don't want to, but I could.
Yeah, do it as a part. And you wouldn't even have to report it as taxes because nobody will
pay me. So there we go.
Anyway.
Today, we're going to be talking about the Season 2 episode Altered Steele, which first aired on October 11th, 1983, and was written by a new name that I didn't recognize, somebody named Jeff Melvoin, and directed by Alexander Singer. So, either I'm...
Singer.
Made me think of like one of those sewing machines, you know? Singer sewing machines.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hey, before we get into the episode, can we do something real quick? We got an email from one of our listeners, and I won't mention the name because we don't have permission to use their name, but they were commenting about our question concerning TV Guide.
Right.
And they said, yes, there is still a TV Guide, but it's not like the TV Guide from back in 1983. It's apparently the size of a regular magazine, and it is not as detailed as it was in 1983.
Interesting.
So it's still here, but apparently this is not your father's TV Guide.
Well, you know, it's funny because I actually had to describe what TV Guide was to my daughter recently, and it made me feel really old. We were reading a book because we read every night, and we were reading this book, and the book mentioned the TV Guide, and she went, "What's that, Mommy?" And I'm like, oh no. Now I feel really old. I'm like, well, once upon a time, child. This is,
You know, the cable systems and the satellite systems, they have that on-screen guide, and it's kind of the same thing, except it's not in print form.
But we don't even have that. We only have streaming. That's all we've got. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The closest, actually, she did watch one episode of, quote, live TV semi-recently. We discovered that our Roku app can get CTV2, which is a local network. And on it, you may recognize this TV show, you may not, but we found at 8 a.m., The Littlest Hobo is on. I don't know if you remember the show.
That.
It was about a dog that went around and solved mysteries and stuff. And it was like, there were 3 iterations of it. One in the 60s, one in the 80s, and one, I guess, was revived in somewhere in the 2000s. But it's live, so it's got commercials, like proper commercials, which she's never seen. So we were sitting there, and she's watching it going, "Mommy, these are annoying. Can we skip past them?" And I'm like, "No, honey, live TV doesn't work that way. You have to actually watch the commercials." And she went, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, this is how I watched TV when I was a kid." And she went, "How did you stand it?" Because she's 7. And I was like, "Well, we suffered." And then shortly through the episode, she also said, "Okay, can you pause it?" And I'm like, "No, it no. Also doesn't pause." So
it's definitely a different experience for a lot of people to have to suffer through that.
Yeah, so she had to.
We did it all the time. That's the only thing we knew.
This is our version of I walked uphill both ways through the snow to get to the TV Guide. So there we are.
Anyway, yeah.
And speaking of the TV Guide listing, that's what I went with this week. See that segue? See how smooth that was? I just slid right on in there. I'm just like pointing that out.
You ought to do a podcast.
I ought to do one someday. Put it on my bucket list. So yeah, I went with the TV Guide listing, which read, "A terrified client doesn't know his own name, much less why someone is trying to kill him. But a fake funeral arranged by Laura and Remington produces 5 suspects, each claiming to be the man's widow." So I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad.
What are any overall thoughts on this one? Because I have some mixed feelings.
Well, obviously there are some serious things that would need to be discussed about this if it were a real life situation.
Yeah.
But since it is a comedy, and since we are playing it as a comedy, I think we can get away with it. But yeah, some guy that has 5 wives, you know, there are some religions where that's okay.
I was going to say he's either...
But the wives know about each other. Yeah. This is not that situation.
Well, okay. So I think what you're saying, like, yes, there are some religions where they do that. It isn't legal, though. Like, there's no actual 5 legal weddings unless you're trying to, like, forge documents, right?
Well, in the U.S., that is true. In probably a lot of other places, that is true. There may be, in fact, I believe that in some, like, Middle Eastern cultures, maybe some Asian cultures,
yes,
plural marriages are considered normal, acceptable.
Yeah, and I mean,
official.
Culturally, I have friends that are polyamorous that have multiple partners, and they all know about each other. This is the key thing; they all know about each other.
Yeah.
They might not be plural marriages, but they, like, sometimes you'll have, like,
relationships,
a couple that's married, and then they have other relationships, and everybody knows about it. And if that's your bag, cool, you do you. But what happens in this episode is
not that.
It's not that. It's definitely not that. And it's one of those things where I have mixed feelings, not on a moral level or whatever, because obviously it's played for laughs, as you said, and we see several characters voice their disapproval towards Frank, notably
yes.
Mildred.
Yes. Yes.
I love Mildred in this episode. I just adore her.
Yes. Yes.
But my mixed feelings come from, I think it could have been done a little bit better, and we'll get into the reasons why, but there's some elements that are just so implausible and so ridiculous that it kind of hand grenades the parts that are really, really funny. So there's that, and I think this episode also retreads some ground that we've already tread, and I'm not sure how well that's done, or I know it's why it's done, and again, we'll get there when we get there, but, like, there's some parts that we've already kind of gone over, and they sort of do again. But other than that, I think there's some really, really funny moments and some great character moments in this episode.
Yes,
there's
absolutely.
some really funny ones. So those are my overall thoughts.
Yeah. I should mention that if anybody hears rain in the background, it's because it's raining here.
It's been raining here for like days and days. We were supposed to look after a neighbor's garden, and she was like, well, don't go up if it's raining. And I was assuming we'd be going every day, and we've gone like 3 times. So I guess July has done our work for us. All right, are we ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's go.
So the beginning of this episode is really trippy. We get all these odd images, this very spinning, woozy camera. We get the ocean.
Weird music.
We have the strange score music. The ocean, a clock, eventually an axe coming down. And then a man wakes up in bed, completely disoriented. And I wanted to read the description of Frank Dannon in the script, because this kind of goes along with some of the other stuff I've been saying about some of the guest characters that they have had on the show, because there's been sort of a type that I've commented on. And let me see here. It's, I'm just going right to it. Bolt of lightning, blah, blah, blah. Okay, close in on Frank Dannon, bolting upright in bed, breathing hard, soaked in sweat, rudely awakened from his nightmare. Frank Dannon is a charming, good-looking guy of about 35 that compact, curly-haired with bright eyes and a winning smile that is at once innocent and mischievous. Okay. We've seen a plethora of blondish, kind of ordinary-looking sort of guys that are somehow described as breathtakingly handsome or getting all these women. And here we have another one that just seems to be like, I couldn't pick him out of a lineup, and somehow he's got 5 brides. 4 of them are remarkably stunning, and the other is not ugly, despite what the script says. So I don't know, I'm a little flummoxed, I guess, in the...
this reminds me of when I was in high school, and
when you slid down on the brontosaurus and sorry.
Yes, yeah. And we had to start our cars going by running our feet on the ground, yeah. And I don't want to offend anybody who was a jock, but when I was in high school, jocks were not thought of as particularly intellectually high. They weren't particularly well thought of intellectually. They weren't great personalities either. They had
a thing.
They had the appearance, they had the body, they had the physique, whatever.
And the Letterman jacket.
Yeah, they had the jacket, but that's about all they had. And yet, I can't tell you how many times I saw these guys with 3, 4, 5 girlfriends all at the same time, all going, oh yeah, they're all hanging out together. And it was very frustrating to people like me who weren't into sports, didn't have the jacket, weren't particularly good looking, and we at least had better personalities, probably marginally smarter at least. And no, you can't get nothing. No. But no, I know what you're saying. I've seen it.
Yeah.
I can't explain it. It just, it is.
It is what it is. Yeah. Yes. And it's funny that you mentioned that because it made me think of everything for me can connect with Buffy somehow, but there's a Buffy episode where there is a jock with a Letterman jacket that has a magic spell on it that causes all the women that see him to fall in love with him. And this includes Buffy, who at this point is like 5 years older than him, and he's like this teenage boy, and they all start fighting over him and trying to kill one another over him. And at one point, Willow, who is a lesbian, she decides she's in love with him, and because of the jacket, right? So, but yeah, anyway, so I just thought that was interesting because I'm watching through this and going, how did that guy get 5 wives? Like, it just he's not hideous. It's not like he's got a face like an ogre or anything. It's just
no, but he's not Pierce Brosnan.
No, he isn't Pierce Brosnan. That is exactly it. That is, and I don't know. But anyway, so he sits up in bed. He gets out of bed fully dressed, then looks out the window. He's in a hotel room, and here's my first question. How did he get there? Like, we find out later he doesn't remember being attacked, but he obviously escaped somehow. Mm-hmm. So any theories as to how he A, escaped, B, got there, and C, then somehow doesn't remember any of it? Because I know that Steele posits the hysterical amnesia theory, and I actually looked into that, which we'll get there when we get there. But like, any ideas on this could be a fan fiction, by the way, how Frank escaped.
Well, the fact that he has amnesia doesn't preclude him from being able to drive a car. So I would assume that he had a car, he drove it there, but having amnesia, he forgot that he had a car, forgot that he drove it there, maybe forgot where it was parked.
How would he check in without knowing his name? Or did he know it and forget it when he went to sleep? Like, when did the amnesia kick in?
Who knows? Maybe the traumatic event that caused the amnesia happened at the motel.
No, it didn't though, because it happened in Mary's living room.
That's true.
He clues in when he sees all
later,
the weird little knickknacks in her house. She's got a weird house. The little clock and the monkey thing. It's creepy.
I don't know. Maybe he had his ID with him, and when he checked in, he showed it to him, and he's lost it since then or whatever. We don't actually know that he didn't have any ID on him.
True.
I don't believe. So
yeah, that's true.
Some of that might be explainable that way, but yeah, it is kind of I'll say inconsistency, or it leaves questions that could be answered.
It's one of those things where they kind of have to start it that way because there's no other way to really start it. He has to be somewhere. He has to have escaped somehow. But it's kind of odd for him to be in a hotel and then having all these nightmares and wake up. He's still fully dressed, so he obviously went to bed in his clothes.
Right.
But yeah, so he wakes up, he goes to the window, he looks out, he wanders over to the phone, picks it up. All of a sudden, he can't remember his name. The voice on the other end is asking him to speak up. He bends down to, I guess, look for his ID, and then that's when the arrow comes through the window and hits the wall right above his head. He went to the window.
He actually bends down to see the room number on the phone.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Because, and this is for all of you people who are younger than me and have never had a desk phone, one that plugs into the wall with a cord. They used to have this little, I guess you'd call it a placard. And it was a clear piece of plastic that set in, and it was like maybe, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch tall by an inch or inch and a half wide. And you'd pull that out. It was clear. And there was a card that went inside there that you could write the phone number on, which was commonly what was put there. But in hotels, they could put the room number there so that if you forgot what room number you were in, all you had to do was look.
So if you were attacked by your crazy serial killer spouse and you had to escape in a hurry, and then you got amnesia, and then you were forgetting your name, and
that's right.
That's
problem solved.
Seems legit, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you're saying he went over to the window.
Well, he looked out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't she shoot him there when he was looking out the window?
She was still loading the bolt on her crossbow. I don't know.
Which, by the way, is a supremely impractical method for killing somebody, because if you miss them, you have to reload.
Well, then don't miss.
Well, she did. She's a terrible... She's killed 7 husbands. You'd think she'd have perfected her technique by this point. That's all I'm saying. Well, if you're going to do something, do it right.
She likes variety in her technique. And true. This is the first time she used the crossbow, and she's still developing her skill.
Okay. Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. So he obviously freaks out, and then we switch to the office. Laura is carrying a crap ton of file folders in her hands. They look to be case files. Mildred is doing the same. She tells Laura that they can start on the next batch. I'm assuming they're organizing their files. They seem to do that a lot. Laura is amazed by her enthusiasm for this sort of work, something we kind of already know about her. Mildred insists that it's fun reading about old cases with all the romance and danger, and says sometimes she thinks Mr. Steele is too good to be true. Laura then remarks that he was supposed to be helping them, to which Mildred says she told him that the girls could handle things themselves. Can I
comment on Mildred's comment? She says, I've been reading through these case files. Intrigue, romance, dangerous, adventure.
Yeah.
They've obviously got a lot of files there. So they've been going through a lot of cases. Presumably there's cases in there that Mildred would have stumbled or could have stumbled across from when Remington Steele wasn't present. He was still a fiction.
Right.
So I wonder, how did they write the case reports? Because especially if there's a case that requires them to provide some sort of legal documentation in some way, like they go into court, they give statements, notarized statements in a case, whatever. They have to be factual. And presumably they would have to mention, well, this investigator did this, that investigator did this other thing. And then we've got this fiction of Mr. Steele. Did they just omit him from the reports? Or did they put him in as a fictional character and attribute to him things that Murphy and Laura and Bernice did?
I'm assuming the latter. I'm assuming it read something along the lines of, because at that point he functioned best in an advisory capacity. I'm assuming that their files would read something like, upon Mr. Steele's advice, Laura Holt pursued this angle, or Mr. Steele provided this briefing for Mr. Michaels to present in court, or something like that. But like, it wouldn't directly involve him. You know, Mr. Steele knocked on suspect's door or whatever. It wouldn't say he did that. It would just be Mr. Steele advised associates Laura and Murphy, that sort of thing, because it keeps him out of it, but it also keeps him in it, I guess.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I assume they put him in there because I think they would have to, I guess, because, again, like you said, we don't know that they've ever gone to court, but I think we could sort of reasonably assume that they would if they've caught people in illegal actions and turn them over to the police. They'd have to probably do that. But we never see it, obviously, because that would be boring. So they don't do that.
Okay. Anyway.
But yeah, then Steele comes in, and immediately Mildred starts to fawn over him, telling him he has a few phone calls, but nothing urgent, asking if he'd like a cup of coffee. He says tea. She runs immediately to get it. And this is the part where I think that they're treading on waters already tread, because we saw in Red Holt, the episode previous to this, Mildred was refusing to give Laura the pictures. She was basically like doing the exact same thing, fawning all over Mr. Steele, and they sat her down, and they didn't fully explain the situation, but he said, Miss Holt is in charge. And she even said, you're the boss, but she's in charge. And then he said, having worked for the government, we've done this. So theoretically, I don't know. I get why this is here, because we've got this wonderful character moment later on with him and Mildred, and I honestly wouldn't trade that for the world, because it's perfect, but it does also kind of feel a bit redundant. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. But then again, keeping in mind a couple of things. First of all, this is episodic TV back in the 80s. Somebody missed the last episode. They need to reiterate this for somebody who missed it in the last episode. But in the real world sense, just because you tell somebody this is the way it is doesn't necessarily mean they change their behavior. And so, yeah, you do sometimes have to, we already had this conversation, didn't we? Oh yeah, we did. So yeah, it does reflect real life sometimes, that you have to go back over and over the same information because people either forget or they resist or whatever.
True. Yeah. And Mildred is pretty enamored with him, so.
Oh, yes. Yes.
To which Laura says, this has got to stop. I want a paperclip, she asks you. I want to everything she asks you, and you need to sit down and talk to her. And Steele, of course, doesn't want to. He insists it would shatter the perfect unity of her universe. And why do that to her? I mean, everything's working so well.
I like his line. I think the truth can be far more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, of course, which is his motto. And actually, now that I think of it, that sets up this whole episode. It really does. That line, the truth can be more trouble than it's worth. There's the light bulb. See, it went on over my head. Because shut up.
It's hard to see with the light shining behind you from the window.
Halo. It's my halo. Makes it totally logical. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it does kind of set up the whole theme, because that's how Frank operates. That the truth is more trouble than it's worth. So he'll just keep getting. I wonder how many women he would have married if he hadn't married the wrong one, so to speak. But either way, enter Frank.
Yes, enter Frank.
Yeah, just as Steele's kind of resisting the whole talk with Mildred. He introduces himself as Frank Dannon, tells them he needs help finding someone. When they ask who, he says, me. And we then switch.
When he walks in, Steele greets him and introduces his loyal associate, Laura Holt. Was that kind of, I don't know, that felt like kind of a dig at her.
Oh, it was 100%.
Especially after that conversation with about Mildred. So.
Oh, yeah, and it says in the script, where is it? It says, how can we help you? I need finding someone. He says, my loyal associate, Laura. And then the script says, Laura manages a sour smile. And loyal is underlined. So, yeah, that was a dig.
That's how I took it. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't misreading it.
So, no, definitely a dig. So, yeah, we switch here. We're in the office. Frank is explaining that he can't remember anything about himself, including his own name. The only reason he knows even that is because the motel clerk told it to him on the phone, which, again, I'm surprised he doesn't have it. This goes back to my further... He would have ID on him. He'd have to. So, did he not check his wallet?
Well, he knows his name at this point.
Right, but you'd think he'd check through his wallet on the way over for more info.
Well, yeah, but, it doesn't tell you a lot about yourself.
Your driver's license tells you your address, doesn't it?
Well, it does if you have the right driver's license. But remember, he had 5 different names, so presumably he had 5 different driver's licenses.
Fair. It's fair. So, yeah, the only reason he knows that is because the motel clerk told him on the phone. He mentions the arrows being shot at his head, to which Laura starts to become skeptical. He asks if it's strange, and we can see that Laura doesn't take him seriously. Of course, Steele is right into this. He stands up, declares it a classic case of amnesia, claiming there are 2 types, hysterical and traumatic. He examines Frank's head like he's some sort of doctor, and says that in the absence of any bumps or bruises, that he seems to be suffering from the hysterical form of the condition, meaning something or someone scared the living daylights out of him.
Teacher?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Was this intended to be a direct reference to the James Bond story, The Living Daylights?
It doesn't say that in the script, but I gotta think
know,
it is.
Yeah.
No, because that hadn't happened yet.
Yes, it had. The movie hadn't happened yet.
Okay.
The movie was 1987.
Yeah.
A book called Octopussy and the Living Daylights, sometimes published as Octopussy,
right. Yes.
was the 14th and final James Bond book written by Ian Fleming in the series. It was a collection of short stories published posthumously in the UK on the 23rd of June, 1966.
Okay.
And it was definitely out there as a title for James Bond. And since the first episode of this season, they've been slipping in these James Bond references.
There's been a lot. Yeah.
I almost have to wonder if it wasn't.
There definitely has been a lot.
Somebody slipped that in intentionally.
Yeah. You know what? You could be right. I didn't even catch that, but good call. I spent my time looking up the types of amnesia that he mentioned.
Okay.
So he's sort of right. There are two types. Hysterical amnesia is basically memory loss presumed to have a psychological rather than neurological cause and is either global or situation specific. This is from the website that I found. Okay. So global psychogenic amnesia, characterized by sudden loss of autobiographical memories for the whole person's past. So there's that one, which seems like that might be his. The other is situation-specific amnesia, refers to a gap in memory for a traumatic incident and can arise in a variety of circumstances, post-traumatic stress disorder, or being a victim of an offense. This is uncommon. The reaction can follow traumatic events, in particular head injury, and can be provoked by physical or psychological stress. More commonly, important personal information is forgotten and the recall of events is during a circumscribed period fails. This often bears relation to traumatic episodes, i.e. a car accident. During the period of memory loss, cognitive skills are entirely intact. So that fits, technically. The other kind of amnesia, what he commented as like traumatic amnesia, is actually called dissociative amnesia. And it's a condition where you can't remember important information about your life. This forgetting may be limited to certain specific areas or may include much of your life history and or identity. In some rare cases called dissociative fugue, you may forget most or all of your personal information, name, personal history, friends, and may sometimes even travel to a different location and adopt a completely new identity. In all cases of dissociative amnesia, you can have much greater memory loss than would be expected in the course of normal forgetting. So I thought that was interesting because it does actually. I wonder if they did some research on amnesia or if they just threw that in there because it's in Spellbound.
Well, they've done some good research on topics in the past in the first season. So they're not without precedent in that respect. But it could just have been because it was in Spellbound. Because, after all, Remington Steele is not supposed to know this stuff.
That's true.
He is regurgitating it from what he's seen in movies.
Yeah.
And so, he comes off as if he knows this stuff. He's acting as if he knows this stuff, but all he's doing is just quoting movie references. So, it's one of those things where he's correct and Steele did the research by watching the movie.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he actually researched the topic.
No, of course not.
So no, I would guess that it's just a reference to the movie.
Fair enough. Frank then remembers the clock, the bell, and the hatchet. He says someone tried to kill him with a hatchet, and that's when Laura kind of excuses them into her office and says, "This man doesn't need a detective, he needs a psychiatrist." She obviously doesn't believe his story. Steele seems to, but she's determined to refer him to a good counselor and send him on his way. It's interesting. Why do you think she doesn't believe him? Is it just because it's crazy sounding? I mean, they've had weirder clients.
Yeah, but it's a crazy story. I mean,
True.
They've had weird clients, but I don't think any of them have had a weird story to this degree.
True. That's fair.
And Steele makes a reference or makes a comment, says, after all, Laura, even paranoids have enemies. And I think part of it is just simply because when you hear a story like this from somebody, you just assume that they are wacko and seeing things that aren't there, because this doesn't happen in real life, not to ordinary people. I mean, if
I
you
don't
might
know. It's not paranoia if they're really out to get you.
I know that, but I think I've said that before. But,
Yeah.
but I mean, you understand that there's a tendency when somebody tells you this sort of a story,
you kind of roll your eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna believe it unless there's some proof. And even if there's, well, I said proof, but let's use the word evidence. So you're not going to believe it unless there's evidence. And even if there is evidence, there's a tendency to try to explain away the evidence some other way.
True.
So, I mean, it takes a lot of evidence sometimes to convince somebody that, no, this person isn't crazy. It really is somebody out to get them. It really is a conspiracy or whatever. So, yeah.
I think Laura is naturally sort of the Scully and he's a bit of the Mulder anyway. So it kind of fits, but
okay.
Yeah. But X-Files.
Yes, I recognize the names.
Okay. Fair
enough. I haven't watched the show, but I recognize the names.
Yeah. Scully is the skeptic and Mulder wants to believe, so just kind of fit. But yeah, so she then asks him how he knows all this. I love this line. How do you know all that stuff about amnesia? And he says, spellbound. And then she replies, yes, I was actually.
Again, totally missing the reference, missing the point.
Yeah. And then he obviously gives the annotation of Gregory Peck, Ingrid Bergman, 1945. And of course, her response, why do I ask?
Why does she ask?
It's a good,
Shouldn't she know by now?
Clearly, that's where it's from. Right? So yeah, they go back into his office. She's about to send Frank on his way when he holds up a piece of the arrow that someone shot at him. And she turns to Steele and says, spellbound? And he says, or Robin Hood, which I thought was a good one. Mm-hmm. And then we get our scene change.
Now, there are two different ones that he could have been referencing. One from 1922 with Douglas Fairbanks, Wallace Beery, Enid Bennett. It was Douglas Fairbanks Pictures. Right. And then Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, Bethel Rathbone, Warner Brothers, 1938. So.
I'm inclined to think that he was going with that one. Would be my thought, because it'd be the more, not that the Douglas Fairbanks one isn't as well known, but like Errol Flynn is Errol Flynn. Like, I don't know. Anyway.
And Basil Rathbone.
Yeah. Here's one of my favorite scenes. And I got to read the script description of this store because as a Canadian, I don't know if it makes me more amused. I'm assuming stores like this don't actually exist. Do they?
It's entirely fictional.
Okay.
I mean, there is nothing about how this is presented
that
has any bearing or relationship to reality other than the fact that, yes, there are stores that sell guns. That's it's like the movies based on a true story. Well, okay, well, there was a guy with this name.
I figured it was
as far as the truth goes.
I figured it was heavily satirical, but I mean, I had to ask. So, as a Canadian, I've done my due diligence. This is the description in the script. Intro Weapon World Day. A shopper's paradise of the latest in modern weaponry. Military surplus meets Abercrombie and Fitch. Wide aisles and bright lighting beckon customers with shopping baskets and pushcarts to purchase hand grenades, electrified barbed wire, early warning detection systems, guns of all kinds, knives, flamethrowers, camouflage jogging outfits, virtually anything short of a tank or ICBM. Somewhere in the melange, the camera lingers for a moment on a sleek contemporary crossbow on display, the same type used in the Bond picture, For Your Eyes Only. There's a Bond reference. There it is. A placard reads, The Leopard Crossbow, a silent killer with awesome power and deadly accuracy. Good enough for the British commandos, good enough for you. On special now. We pick up on Laura, Remington, and Dannon approaching the checkout counter where the store manager overlooks the brisk sales in BG. A sweet-looking grandmother loads an already full shopping cart with several hand grenades on special this week. Get them while they last. So, and also there's the shot of the family, which I didn't read, where a young couple with a toddler emerges from the store. The man cradles an M16 rifle with infrared sniper scope. The wife totes belts of ammunition. The boy carries a G.I. Joe doll. Our threesome is momentarily taken aback.
Yes.
I love it. This is one of my favorite scenes. And I don't even know why. I just, the old lady putting the hand grenades in her little basket like they're oranges or something. And she's just piling them in there. And I'm just like, okay, all right. It makes
the rest of the episode is absurd. Why not this?
Right. Like I said, I figured it was largely satirical. But there is a song, and it's... I don't want to offend those of our American audience, because I realize that's most of you, but there's a song it's by a group called the Arrogant Worms, called The War of 1812. And it's all about how we burned down the White House. Sorry. But we did that. And
it's a historical fact.
Yeah, actually, the song even goes, and the White House burned, 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 and we're the ones that did it. It burned, burned, burned. Well, the Americans ran and cried. It burned, 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 and things were very historical. So that's the chorus. And in the song, there's a little improvised bit where the singers are pretending to be Americans coming to Canada, and they want to see all of Canada in a day. And they've got a bunch of guns in their car, and they came in a tank. And at one point they're like, a tank? Where did you get a tank? Walmart. And that's the response. And it just, obviously it's meant as satire, so please do not be offended. I love you, America. I do. But it just made me think of that song.
I'll never forgive you for saying Walmart.
Well, that's what they said. I didn't write the song. It's like, a tank? Where did you get a tank? Walmart. Anyway, so I just love this scene. I think it's hilarious. And they're looking at everything going on. Just, Laura is hilariously horrified. I love it. I'm assuming you had the same impression, or did you?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was a great scene once you got past the total fiction of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, this is one of those digs at the show's sort of ethos of the blood isn't real, and the fact that they themselves don't even know where their own gun is, and they're seeing this store where Granny's picking up some hand grenades on her way home. Like that, it kind of, I think, contrasts the elegance of the characters, right? That they're in this store, and they go in there. Laura points out that they can't find out who he is at the moment, so the arrow is all they have to go on. So she approaches the store manager, and a couple of things about him. The description of him.
Oh, he is so over the top.
I love him.
Just like his store. Just like his store. He's over the top.
Yeah. The store manager, a beefy reactionary whose life is a matter of preparation for the day when we meet the Red Menace head on. I love it. But I will point out, too, the actor that plays the store manager here is a character actor, and he's been seen in a ton of stuff. I recognized him right away. Now, I recognize him from the Buffy spinoff Angel. See, everything connects to Buffy somehow. He plays a lawyer on the show named Holland Manners, who works for an evil law firm called Wolfram and Hart. And they basically are working to bring about the apocalypse. So he's immortal. He's
Sounds
demonic.
Like lawyers.
He's yeah, pretty much. They nailed it head on, right? But so he's Holland Manners to me, and I saw him in the store, and I'm like, oh, that's hilarious that they've got him in this role. But did you recognize him from anything? Because he's been in a ton of stuff.
Yeah, I recognized him, but not necessarily from anything specific.
Yeah.
If I looked him up in the IMDb, I would probably recognize some of the things that he's been in. But
I did, and I was like, oh, he's been in way more stuff than I thought. So yeah, he's a really he got around. He was in a lot of TV shows and played regular characters in them. So because he was on Angel for a good 3 or 4 seasons. So yeah, until he got eaten by vampires. Yeah, it happens.
That'll do it.
It's an occupational hazard.
Yeah.
So they go up to the store manager. He immediately tells them she won't stop many commies with that. And what she really needs is the basic Armageddon package. I don't know about you, but I don't have the basic Armageddon package. I think I might need to go and pick that up. I'm not going to stop too many commies.
I'm not sure I could afford it.
Now, okay, so here's my question, because again, this is a generation gap thing. So I'm not calling you old, but
I'm
dinosaurs.
Old.
Yeah. Yes. I remember. So I have brief memories of sort of a post-Cold, because this point was transitioning out of the Cold War at this point, right? And I remember as a kid, I remember our textbooks changing when the Soviet Union broke apart and them having to replace the books in my school, right? And I remember hearing a lot about nuclear war and from parents and grandparents and the fear of nuclear war and nuclear bombs and things like that. And I remember asking my grandmother about it, and she told me, well, if a bunch of countries have them, then they're not going to shoot at each other because it would destroy mutually assured destruction. She basically described to me. That terrified me. Absolutely terrified me. I couldn't sleep for like weeks thinking about like the bomb about to drop kind of thing. And my school, at least, still did drills for it. And so we're talking like late 80s, early 90s. Was this a big thing? Like, was there still a great fear of communism and the Red Menace and the bomb dropping, or is this over exaggerated as well?
I think it's over exaggerated. I don't remember anything like what you're describing in school when I was a kid. We did not have bomb drills. We had fire drills, but didn't have any bomb drills that I could recall. Politicians and TV, there was talk of Russia and communism and aggression and the nuclear doomsday clock and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't. I guess it was more media hype than anything else. And I think a lot of people recognized it as being nothing more than, or little more than media hype. It was...
Maybe it was scarier for me because I was a small child and like, you don't really recognize the difference between media hype and what could feasibly happen versus what the media is trying to scare you about.
Right.
Could be.
But yeah, I don't remember it being really a topic of huge concern when I was a kid, which would have been in the 60s.
Yeah, the drills that we did were, I think we did. I mean, maybe I'm mixing this up in my head, but I you know how memories are. I could be making that part up.
No, I don't actually, because I have very few of them.
Well, and so does Frank, so it kind of picks with the episode. But like, because I remember doing inclement, like tornado drills, fire drills, and I thought we did bomb drills, but maybe we didn't. Maybe I'm making that up. I do know we never did active shooter drills until I was in high school and Columbine happened. That was not a thing from my early childhood. And now it's part of, like, now we do, because I teach, we do lockdown drills, shooter drills, fire drills, tornado drills, all those kinds of stuff. So obviously this guy's still living in fear of the Red Menace, even if people overall weren't.
I remember having fire drills, and I think I vaguely recall having earthquake drills drills at some point, at some place. But I don't know where, because my family was I was about 5 when my family moved out of Alaska, and we moved to Idaho, and then we were in Idaho, Arizona, and Oregon at various times, and none of them I would have thought would have had earthquake drills. But at some point in my recollection, I recall earthquake drills, because you get down under your desk to protect from things falling on top of you, or
maybe that's what we did.
Doorway or something.
Maybe we did earthquake drills, because I remember being under my desk, and I thought that was, maybe I mixed those two in my brain when my grandmother explained mutually assured destruction to a small child. Good job, Grandma. Way to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's think about it. If you're in the middle of a nuclear explosion, getting under your desk isn't going to do
it's not going to do a darn thing. You're just going to kiss your butt goodbye, basically. But yeah, so obviously, like I said, the Red Menace has not has deeply impacted the store owner, because he says you're not going to kill a bunch of commies with that. And Laura starts to protest again. He says, if price is the problem, we've got installment plans that'll just blow you away, which I love. Good choice of words. Fantastic.
Well, hey, wait a second. If the Red Menace comes, I don't have to pay my financing back.
There you go. Yeah, you wouldn't have to pay those installment plans. So that, as he says this, there's two hands in the background with leather gloves on, setting up the display machine gun, which, okay, I guess that's something you're able to do. And the person, like, I know that's satirical, because there's no way in hell you'd be allowed to load a gun in a gun store and shoot it, or have, like,
no,
like, that would be behind a counter of some sort, but it's on display, and she's
no,
loading.
actually, you wouldn't even be allowed to have a machine gun in a store. In fact, you can't even get a machine gun in the United States unless you go through thousands of dollars of permits and all kinds of background checks. And it's, you know, these TV shows make it, oh, everybody's got a machine gun. No, not even close. You cannot, basically, you can't get one. So, yeah. So they would not have something like that in the store. But
fair.
This is Remington Steele. So
somehow they do, and
yes.
this woman is loading it, and you can see the bracelet she's got on with the little bell. As he's trying to sell her this Colt action rifle, Laura yells, "Dan Hut!" And then she explains that they are private investigators. I know, who need to purchase this arrow, and of course, that's when he says, "Hey, wait a minute! What are you, one of those flaming liberals trying to take arrows out of law-abiding citizens?" I love it. Flaming liberals trying to take arrows out of law-abiding citizens. Yep. Because
it was a stupid question on Laura's part anyway. Because I mean, that's like, well, who bought this orange? I want to know who bought this orange. Well, there's no serial number on it.
Yeah, it's not like you would. I mean, now you might have a computer system that does, because a lot of times, like, I know electronic stores and things like that will keep your receipt on file, right? So you can come in and you can, but I mean, you'd have to have a book where you're writing down every sale you make, which would be a bit silly. So, and it sounds like that guy's a few arrows short of a quiver. So he's probably not, that's a good pun. He's probably not keeping too much track of who's got what. He just wants everyone to have the basic Armageddon package. So,
yes.
You know, and all of a sudden the machine gun on display starts firing. Why is it available to just load and fire like that? Because reasons.
Because it's a TV show and we can do it.
Just because we can. Here's my question. I mean, I realize that she's a dispassionate serial killer who doesn't care who she hurts, but wouldn't this kill more than just Frank?
Well, of course.
Okay, so we're on the same page.
So what's your question?
Okay, right. We're moving along. Okay. Everyone hits the deck. Steele grabs the grenade. Laura asks what he's doing, and he yells back, "Sands of Iwo Jima, John Wayne, 1949," before lobbing it at the machine gun, which of course blows it up and stops it. Yeah. I like that. It's good. It's another movie reference. Steele saves the day. And then, of course, he asks if everyone's all right. A few people respond, including the store manager, who yells, "Come on, you heathens, I'm ready for you." Laura looks back at Frank, who is still lying there. He looks to be dead. He isn't, but of course, we get this nice little shift. Funereal music plays, and the scene shifts to a coffin. And a man standing next to it, presumably the priest. Laura's looking... Here's my question. Okay. She's looking at a newspaper with a headline which reads, "Mystery Man Dies." There's a picture of Frank's face. How did they have a contact at the newspaper? This is not an obit. This is a full article.
Well, Remington Steele declares that it's murder, gets into the newspaper. So I would imagine, Remington Steele is investigating the death of this mystery man. So it makes the newspapers. That's either that or they've just got somebody on the newspaper that I won't say works for them, but gives them good press.
Well, this is fake press, so fake news. Right here. Sorry. Also, whose coffin is that? Coffins are not cheap.
Well,
did they borrow it?
You could rent.
Did they rent it by the hour? Like, that's fine. We only need it for 30 minutes tops. And it clearly has to be closed casket because there's nobody in it. And presuming that he has other family members, we don't see any.
No.
But would this not legitimately traumatize those family members? They think he's dead.
Yeah, but it's a TV show. We can get away with it.
So we're just going with this is a goofy episode and sailing right on by it. All right, that's fair.
That's right.
I'm just trying to see.
Well, I thought about that too, because presumably, like you said, there are other family members. So why didn't they show up?
Yeah, that too. Like, where are they? I mean, I get that maybe they just didn't see the newspaper article or something, but obviously his 5 wives did.
Yeah.
So.
And maybe Frank Dannon isn't even his real name, so nobody in the family made the connection. Oh, wow, that looks a bit like Harry. That can't be. It says, he's in Los Angeles. We know Harry's over in, Nebraska or whatever.
That's the trouble with Harry.
Oh,
sorry. You just walked right into that. Like, led with your chin.
Yeah.
But
I don't have a chin.
You do. It's just very fluffy. But yeah, like, you're right.
I have fluff to hide the fact that I have no chin.
Things we all needed to know, right?
Yes.
Anyway. But yeah, you're right. Frank Dannon might not be his real name, but if he isn't, then he's given 5 women a fake name because they've all taken his last name, which is also quite funny. So they all show up. Before they show up, Frank asks if Mr. Steele is sure it will work. Laura says if nothing else, they're going to learn more about him based on who shows up. Frank worries nobody will, and Steele assures him that his knowledge of the criminal element tells him the killer will show up out of a perverse sense of symmetry and desire to see the job was done. Knowledge of the criminal element.
Yes. I mean, he's not wrong.
No, and it sounds like his criminal mind at work again, right? So I like that line. Frank asks, what if he's wrong? And Steele turns and says, wrong? Remington Steele? To which we get a great eye roll from Stephanie.
Oh, yes.
It's just perfect. Yes. She's just, oh, God. But she has to go along with it because, of course, he is the great Remington Steele. So.
Of course. And then there's Mildred, who knows absolutely nothing about cameras. Why did they give her
she's got the lens cap on.
That's right.
That camera's not cheap either.
The way those cameras work is when the lens cap's on, you can't see anything through there.
No.
There are some cameras that have a separate viewfinder, so you could leave the lens cap on and not realize it, but not on that one.
I think that's how she figures out the lens cap isn't on. She puts it up to her face, realizes she can't see anything, and takes the lens cap off.
Yeah, but it takes her a minute.
It does. She catches on. She's learning. She's still learning. So she's hiding in a tree. She's got a very expensive camera. And a very young Delta Burke exits the car. Frank says, I wonder who she is. Laura says that she hoped he could tell him, but Frank only speculates that she might be his sister. Because, I mean, I think there we see the truth. He knows that a guy like him could not get a woman like her. Just saying. We then see a series of car doors opening, a beautiful blonde woman, another thin, expensive-looking brunette, ironically played by the woman who was the mother on Malcolm in the Middle. If you ever saw that show, it's the same actress.
No.
A sweet-faced and rather innocent-looking blonde, and finally a short, frumpy redhead. Frank comments that he must come from a large family. Which is good.
Yeah.
I like it. And they do this, it's worth noting that they do this funeral gag again later on in the series, only with them as the victims, if you recall. And it's funny then too, so I guess they know it works. The priest says, dearly beloved, let's begin, calls for the wife of the deceased to please step forward, and of course all 5 women do. Laura and Steele look at one another in horror, and Frank passes out.
Which is confusing.
I've never been at a funeral where they've asked the deceased's spouse to step forward. Usually that the funeral is planned by the spouse, right? It's usually planned by. So.
I would imagine that that's part of the purpose of this funeral, to find out who's attending, who they are relative to Frank, their victim. And so I would imagine it was kind of set up with the minister there to say, hey,
the priest was in on it, is what you're saying? Like the priest was.
Well, they asked him to ask for the spouse.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So, of course, we switch scenes again. We're now in the office, and we've got pictures, so clearly Mildred figured out the camera.
Yeah.
Laura is identifying each of the women. The sweet-faced blonde is Terry Lowell Dannon. Laura asks if it rings any bells, but Frank says she looks like a total stranger. Steele then shifts to widow number 2. This is like the dating game, but like really perverse, right? And we have door number 2, widow number 2, who is Barbara Troy Dannon. That's the actress that's Malcolm in the Middle's mom.
Mm-hmm.
Frank shakes his head, so they switch to Delta Burke and identify her as Nancy Stinson Dannon. Frank still doesn't remember anything, so they switch to the frumpy redhead, identify her as Stella Martino Dannon. Frank comments that she's not his type, to which Mildred snarkily responds, everyone appears to be your type.
I mean, you have such a democratic taste in women.
Yeah, I love it. I just love it. Like, Mildred is so angry at this man. Like, she's just not having it. And I adore it because it makes for some real comedy gold. And it really shows that they made the right choice when they picked Doris Roberts here, because she was funny in Steal Away with Me. She's good in Red Holt Steel. She's not in it much, but she's good in Red Holt Steel. And then now she's back and she's in fine form, and we're just getting the...
Can you imagine a 30-something saying that line?
Yeah, it would have come across as catty and like, I don't know, like it wouldn't have had the same...
I just can't imagine somebody in that age range saying anything like that.
Yeah, like it just wouldn't have had the same impact. It wouldn't have been... I don't think it would have been funny. I think it would have come across as just angry.
Yeah.
Like, Mildred's funny. She delivers that line and it's funny. Yes. And then has to fix it with her. I mean, you have such democratic taste in women. And the final slide is our villain, the gorgeous blonde. Frank says, I wish I remembered her. And Laura tells her that this is Mary Howell Dannon. Mildred comments on his 5 wives in a way that's very disapproving. Saying it out loud causes Frank to get woozy again, and he remembers a little bit more of his attack. So when he comes to, he tells him he keeps having these flashes where he's being attacked with a hatchet. He can't see who it is, but he knows it's a woman. Mildred says,
what a surprise.
Oh, Mildred, thank you. And then, of course, Steele has another movie quote, Mirage, with Gregory Peck, Walter Matthau, Universal, 1965. And he tells them that in the film, Peck is being attacked and keeps having dreams of his killer. Mildred connects the dots, fawns over him, and says it's amazing when their boss uses old movies to get to the heart of things. Laura responds, stupefying.
I have a question about that movie, or specifically about some comments that were made. When Steele references the movie, Frank Dannon says, I don't remember that one. And Remington says, I'm not surprised. And I'm wondering why he's not surprised. Now, I tried to find some original 1965 reviews of the movie, which I did not find. And I did that because I thought, well, maybe it just got a lot of bad reviews, and so nobody went to see it. The only reviews I found were recent ones, and they were gushing. So I don't know.
I just assumed it had to do with his memory. Like, I just assumed he was making a memory joke because he can't remember anything else.
Okay, it could be.
It's not a very good memory joke because he just doesn't remember who he is. It's not like he doesn't know about the rest of the world. So, like, it's kind of like that other one that the one from Hearts of Steel that was another reference to a movie when Laura was drunk, and it was kind of like you have to connect A to B to C to D and eventually to get the joke. I think it's kind of like that, where they're making a crack about his memory, but it doesn't really fit because he wouldn't forget pop culture. He just forgets him.
It's just the way it came across. It sounded like Remington was commenting that wasn't surprised that he didn't remember that one because nobody remembered that one. You know, The Shining. Yeah. Did anybody see The Shining?
Did anybody see The Shining? Yeah, and that was relevant, right? I didn't realize it because I was looking back at The Shining, having achieved now this reputation of being a great film, and
that's what I was thinking might have been the case in this one. But like I said, I didn't find any of the original 1965 reviews. So I don't know if it just got really, really badly panned at the time. And so that was why nobody remembered it from that time. And it's only been in retrospect that everybody says it's, terrific film, gripping thriller, brilliant, one-of-a-kind masterpiece. Like I said, all the modern reviews are gushing. So it just made it seem like a curious statement.
I think it's just a joke that didn't land, personally. But yeah, if anybody knows about that film, please let us know. So Frank reminds them that he can't remember anything, and Steele tells him Peck didn't figure it out either until he was staring death right in the face. Laura responds with, "Terrific. Do you think we might get there earlier?"
Yeah.
And then Steele points out they at least have solid suspects, and Mildred helpfully adds 5 to be exact.
But who's counting?
But who's counting? Exactly. Laura points out that one of them might have tried to give him a quickie divorce. Frank asks Steele how they'll figure out which one. Steele asks Laura to take him through how the plan he's been devising, of course.
Yes.
Laura says that since the funeral was Mr. Steele's idea, what goes better with it than a wake, so that they can drink to the dear departed. And then, of course, Mildred starts fawning again. Like, just even gripping her cheeks. Going, brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant.
And again, I'll throw that question that you asked me back at you. Can you imagine a 35-year-old woman doing that?
No.
It would come across as infantile, right? Like,
yes. Yeah.
Whereas with Mildred, it's just kind of adorable.
Yeah, it's like your grandmother,
Yeah. Like, he's just so brilliant. I just want to squeeze his cheeks. And, she just loves him. And, of course, it just bothers Laura all the more.
Yeah. Oh, you know what I got right in here? If looks could kill, Steele would be among the dearly departed. Not just
he'd have an arrow through his neck, probably, because she just wants to give him a quickie. Not a divorce, because they're not married, but you know what? I was trying to make a pun. It didn't work. But yes, we get the... Yeah, she's not happy.
Yeah.
I think at this point, I'm just going to ask, what are our thoughts on Frank overall? I mean, this guy literally lied to and deceived 5 women. What do we think of him? Because it's obvious Mildred hates him. The show wants us to be sympathetic to him. Are we?
At this point, it's a little bit tough to, keeping in mind, of course, that we're playing it for laughs. But yeah, it's kind of one of those, seriously, guy? So no, it's at this point. I think later on when we get the story, we're a little more sympathetic, but no, right now it's tough to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a bit of a, I'll say, sleazeball at this point.
He definitely, yeah. I mean, it's again to if you were going back to people that have multiple partners that all know about each other, that's one thing. But this guy has married 5 women who don't know about each other. That's pretty awful. Like, that's a pretty awful thing to do.
Well, I think things like this have happened in the past and have made the news.
Yeah.
And it's never a good situation. It's never a good story. It never ends well for anybody, including the
it really doesn't.
So,
yeah. Actually, you know what? It's funny that you use that word, because we were watching earlier today. We usually watch a movie on Sundays, and we watched Tiny Toon Adventures: How I Spent My Summer Vacation, which came out in 1992 and had like no theatrical release. It was straight to DVD. Straight to VHS, because it was 1992. And I was showing it to my daughter because she had never seen it. And there's a scene where Buster Bunny is grabbed by these like hillbilly alligators, and the Big Daddy alligator wants to marry him off to all 3 of his daughters. And Buster says, "I can't marry all 3 of them. That's bigamy." And he says, "No, that's bigamy." And yeah, that's what I always think of now when I hear the word bigamy. So anyway, bad pun, but I thought it was funny. So Mildred guesses. She gushes about how brilliant he is. We switch scenes. Steele says he'll bring the cold cuts, which is kind of funny. And then we switch to Laura's loft, which is now fully furnished and completely. So this must be sometime after Red Holt, because that looks like a she totally redid that loft. Had to.
Yeah, she spent a lot of time redoing that. Took a week off work or a couple of really long weekends staying up till like 3
You'd
o'clock
have
in the
to
morning.
paint it, furniture, install a kitchen, like all of the stuff that she has. It's a nice space though. Like it's a really as a set. I think this is one of my favorite sets of the show. Their offices look great. His apartment, I always felt, was very sort of cold and impersonal, which makes sense given that he doesn't really have a permanent residence most of the time. So
right.
Aside from his movie posters, we don't get a sense that it could be anybody's apartment, but hers, there's a personality to it.
Yeah.
Which I think
it
is
cool. It's a nice set.
So he's putting out food. He's got a record, which he puts on, which plays "Here Comes the Bride," to which she says, "Wrong side." He responds with, obviously, turns it over, and it plays something more funereal sounding, which is kind of funny. I don't know where you'd get a record that has "Here Comes the Bride" on one side and funeral music on the other, but I guess from the funeral home, maybe, because "Till Death Do Us Part," that takes on a whole new meaning there.
Hey, one record covers it all.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. She asks how she looks, and he reminds her to look a bit more distraught. She puts on a sad face. He nods and says, "Portrait of grief," before going to answer the door. Barbara has arrived first. She comes in. Laura introduces Steele as her friend and attorney, Sterling Gillette.
Yeah. What is it with these names that she invents? And actually, he invents too.
Yes. So that was my question. Who came up with this alias? Was it him or her?
Myrtle Groggins is the one that Steele, I think, came up with on his own. And Sterling Gillette kind of fits in with Remington Steele.
True.
So I'm going to say that Laura came up with this one because they're both that same type of, Gillette being a razor, Steele football team, Remington a typewriter,
Sterling Silver. Sterling Silver. I can't talk.
Yeah. So all the names that she uses have some sort of a reference to something that is masculine, that is valued or whatever. And then you have Myrtle Groggins.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
Well, it's certainly no Nigel Willie Lentil, but it's still it's good. It's a good one. I like it. So Laura tells Barbara that she was out of town when it happened, and that they were supposed to be married next month. So it's clever that she doesn't introduce herself as a wife because she wasn't at the funeral, and she's obviously she would have been number 6 according to her. Barbara admits she came to find out how they all ended up in black. Laura bursts out fake crying, which Barbara hugs her, and then the doorbell rings again. Terry and Stella walk in, obviously discussing Frank. Terry describes him as sweet and gentle, whereas Stella claims he was an animal and pure carnivore. She notices Steele hovering behind them and asks him to go pour them a couple of shots as they're having girl talk. So there's that.
I would say that Frank's taste in women was not only democratic in their appearance, but also in their personalities.
Well, this is another thing that I was thinking about because we are not a species that are technically predisposed to monogamy. Biologically, the imperative, especially for the male species, is to spread his genetics, I'm going to go with, to be family show oriented. So we sort of evolved into monogamy as a cultural thing. And again, like you pointed out, not every culture practices it, right? So you've got, when you think about the person that you decide to spend your whole life with, it's like a really difficult thing to find somebody who's going to fit your personality because you don't have just one personality. You're a different person, theoretically, with different friends. You might hang out with a friend who really loves sports, a certain sport, because you love that sport. But you might hang out with a different friend who loves musical theater because you love musical theater. And you might hang out with a different friend who likes to go antique shopping because you like to. So we have all these friends that fit different parts of ourselves, right? But we are expected to choose one person that's theoretically going to at least complement most of our parts of ourselves. Otherwise, it's going to be a really terrible marriage. So in some ways, it seems like Frank was just trying to like compartmentalize his interests and find the different wives that suit each different interest, which is clever. I'll give him that, I guess.
Well, but you know, you're talking about having friends that do this and friends that do that and friends that do this other thing. And, you know, that's kind of what the function of friends are, is to allow you to have those other interests, and those friends with those interests don't necessarily have to intersect with other friends or your spouse. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm not agreeing with what Frank has done at all, because I think it's horrible.
Good, because it sounded like you were.
No, I was just pointing out that, like, in his mind, that's probably what he thought he was doing, right? I'm
not sure he thought that far.
No, that's true. That's true.
I think it was just, oh, I'm in love again. Oh, I'm there was some actress, I don't remember who it was. She kept getting married and then she'd have affairs, but she felt guilty about the affairs because she was an old-fashioned girl. And so she'd get divorced and marry this new guy. And it's like, because I'm an old-fashioned girl, I believe in marriage. It's like, I think that's what Frank was doing here. He's just like, I believe in marriage. I love this person. That. I'm just going to go get married. And oh, yeah, this is not really the definition of what is traditional marriage.
It really isn't.
I think it is.
Yeah. No, he even says that at some point, that he's a romantic at heart, which is why he married all of them, which is like, okay, but like
odd definition of
yeah. Not sure they'd consider that awfully romantic when they find out, but you know, whatever. So we switch over here to Mildred, this is one of my favorite scenes. She's at Steele's apartment. She's obviously on Frank babysitting duty. She's checking the windows. Frank comments that she's checked them multiple times, and Mildred gets dramatic, saying, "These are mean streets out there where a man's life could be bought for bus fare and a woman's virtue is as thin as the paint on her face." Where did she get that?
You know, she is as much a bad parody of a movie dialogue as Steele is.
Yes.
I mean, all I can say is I wish I was packing a rod, a Roscoe, an equalizer, artillery.
And okay, I gotta know, like, I only know a couple of these adjectives for guns, right? I know a Gat is short for Gatling gun, equalizer, artillery, but do you know where Roscoe comes from?
No idea.
Okay, not just me then. I should have Googled it. I should have
too. I thought about it and I thought, no.
But yeah,
that's a common enough word, and I'm so bad at Google searches. I'd have probably gotten all kinds of things about fair. Roscoe P. Coltrane or whatever.
It's probably a type. Like it's probably like a type of gun, I assume. If anybody knows, please email us. We'll just let the listeners do it for us.
Yes, that's right. I have two questions about this too. She puts on Laura's hat and begins having a Walter Mitty moment. Imagining she's just. Why is Laura leaving her hat at Steele's apartment?
I that was in my notes. Why did she leave her hat at his place? Did she forget it? Was she over there earlier? Like where how did that get there?
Yeah.
Did Mildred swipe it just to put it on?
Who knows?
You see her shoving it in her purse, like, I'll put this on later.
Yeah.
And again, I can't imagine a 35-year-old woman having that same comedic appeal when she delivers those lines. Like, it just seems, and again, maybe these scripts were written now that they had hired Mildred. Hired Doris, sorry. Maybe they were written specifically for her. I don't know how many scripts they had commissioned and written before they had cast the secretary, but I'm assuming
they would have had to have had several of them written before the season started, or at least near completion.
Yeah. So it fits. She fits so perfectly, because Frank, before she goes on to all of the adjectives for gun, he says he doesn't think any of these nice women are trying to kill him, and then that's where she says she wishes she was packing a rod. Then she also says, but the boss doesn't like us carrying. We're going to have a talk with him about that. The boss doesn't like us carrying. I don't know if it's that, Mildred. I think he just doesn't know where it is. Again, this is not a moral objection. Well, we know he doesn't care for guns, but like he also doesn't know where to find his. So, yeah.
In honest, actual fact, I can't imagine that the subject and the conversation even ever came up with Mildred. So I think she's again, doing the Walter Mitty thing.
This is definitely her plan out, or her fantasy, which is very cute.
Mm-hmm.
And then Frank entirely misses the point. Here's the point for people who can't see me. My hand is over to my left. And here's Frank. My hand is over to my right. And they're not connecting because he says, if 5 women really wanted to marry him, he must be a pretty lovable guy, right?
There's a lot of people that fall for the marriage scam, the internet thing that.
Yes, true.
You meet somebody on the internet, you fall in love with them and you want to marry them, but they've got to have some money to come over and marry you.
Yeah. And then you send them the money, and
these people aren't necessarily lovable. They just put on a good act.
Which is why Mildred says wrong. Like, she's not. No one's there to make her be diplomatic here. So she's her disapproval is clear, right? And
yes.
Frank insists that if he could just talk to them, he could straighten it out. And Mildred says, "You're dead, mister, and you're going to stay dead until we figure out who's trying to kill you," which is a good line. I like this one. So Frank says, "Well, I guess I know when I'm licked." And he says he's going to take a shower and go to bed. Mildred thinks that she's won. Poor Mildred. I feel so bad for her, right? Because obviously he's used to charming women and putting one over on them, right? So, and this is when he goes into Steele's room. She goes over to where the fedora is sitting, puts it on, and says, "I'm sending you over, Angel," in a funny accent. And Frank, in the meantime, is sneaking out the window.
Yes.
So, poor Mildred.
How did he get down? There must have been a fire escape right there.
So this is the discussion that actually was on the Facebook group. I don't know if it was a day or two ago, but fans were discussing just how high up his apartment is.
Mm-hmm.
Because people have gotten into it before. Felicia did. Mm-hmm. Shannon does later on, and they all seem to come through his bedroom window. So either he's low to the ground enough to climb up, or there's a fire escape of some sort. There'd have to be.
Well, except what was it? I think it was Steele Belted, where there was a guy out on the street corner.
Oh, that's right.
Waving and motioning Steele.
So he's higher
and you could
up.
look down, and he's at least, I would say, at least the 3rd story up. Yeah. Just from that shot.
So then there's got to be a fire escape, because
got to be either that or he's got a rope ladder.
That bedroom has more comings and goings than Metro Station sometimes. So. I can't
Makes you wonder why they bother putting a door on the front of the apartment,
right? And I can't claim that that's my line. That was from Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. So I don't want to get sued or in trouble. So, but Lois describes Cat Grant's bedroom as having more comings and goings than Metro Station. I like. So he goes out the window, and then we switch back to Laura's loft. Nancy and Mary are talking. Mary says she can't believe Nancy was married to Frank and didn't know that he was okay. Here's the issue that I have with this now. An aerospace engineer, and Nancy replies, "That's because the Frank I married was a neurosurgeon." Terry then explains says that explains it. My Frank was a history professor. But one night when we were in the middle of, he started shouting, "Clamp it, clamp it." Later on, we find out that Stella claims that he was a truck driver, and Barbara says that he had to be away a lot for his antique shop. How can you do all of... There's no way you could be a neurosurgeon and be away that long from your profession. Like, some of them lend themselves to long absences. Truck driver, for example, but aerospace engineer? How?
An aerospace engineer, I could almost see that, because there are conferences that you go to. There are design jobs that require you to be at a certain location working with a certain group of people, and it can't be done remotely, especially at this time. neurosurgeon. Hey, if you're a top neurosurgeon, you have people wanting your services all over the world. And, if you need a vacation and you want to go see somewhere nice and somebody needs some neurosurgery done, yeah, get them to pay for your trip and pay for your hotel room and buy your meals for you. And then you do a little cutting and then.
But wouldn't he have to actually be doing these jobs? I mean, like, how is he doing all I'm saying is, how is he doing all 5 of them at once? Not the wives, the jobs. Just making clear. It's a whole other question. But
that's a whole other question, yes. I've heard stories about bigamists before, and I've never understood that same basic question. How do they manage to do all this stuff, keep all these households going, keep everybody separate? How do they manage to do that? I mean, they've got to be.
And there's no children involved. We don't see any kids, so he didn't have any kids with these women, which is a good thing, probably.
Probably a good thing.
But history professor, I'm sorry, but that one he'd have to be there for. You have classes, you have students. You can't just pick up and, I mean, yes, you can take sabbaticals, sure, but it just.
Yeah, well, we don't know how he's making his income. Obviously, there's something going on that is generating income for him. But yeah, you're right. I mean, how? Maybe he's driving truck and that's really where his income is, and the rest are just things he's done in the past.
Could be. I mean,
I don't know.
I gotta say though, if he is doing all 5 of those jobs at once, the one job that he should be in is like life planning, because that man can organize a calendar, right? Like, yes. I'm going to be with Mary on Monday, and then I'm going to be with Stella on Tuesday. Oh, Wednesday, it's Barbara. Like, you know what that makes me think of? Mambo Number 5. That song? Oh, you don't know that song, Mambo Number 5 by Lou Bega? Okay, hold on.
I'm familiar with it. Okay, I guess I can see it. Yeah, because he's talking about all these girls that he's.
Yeah, because a little bit of Monica in my life, a little bit of Erica by my side, a little bit of Rita is what I need, a little bit of Sandra in the sun, a little bit of Mary all night long, right? Like, he's got a lot of women. That guy can't make up his mind either.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Okay. So, also, here's my question, too. These women are swapping Frank stories like they're at a picnic. None of them seem to be annoyed or angry with each other. Like, and I will say this. I'm actually kind of grateful for that, because usually in these sorts of stories, you get the women that basically attack one another and ignore the fact that the real person that they should be angry with is the man who lied to them, right? Like, it shouldn't be each other that they're fighting with, but these women are like bonded, like they're just bestest of friends, and they're swapping Frank stories like at summer camp. So,
like the recipes.
Well, yeah, exactly. So what did you make of that? Because that seemed pretty bizarre.
Well, my thought was that they were still kind of in a state of disbelief. No, this can't be right. Okay. It can't be.
Yeah.
He's my husband. He can't be yours. You've made a mistake.
True. Could be. Yep. Yeah. They're just like, no. My Frank he didn't know an antique from a crankshaft kind of thing. Yeah. Well, my Frank was this. Well, my Frank was that. It could just be that they're trying to make sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the personalities of this Frank and that Frank are so diverse that they're just having trouble reconciling that. No, it really wasn't 5 different guys. It was just one guy. So
yeah, that's true. And then of course Nancy sidles up in the meantime to Steele, latches onto him, calling him blue eyes and saying that she finds the law so stimulating. And then he quips, yes, corpus delicti, ipso facto, rigor mortis. Pretty much the least sexy Latin phrases anybody could pick. Corpus delicti, rigor mortis. Endless fascination.
Yes.
Laura notices a gun inside Barbara's purse. She offers when she offers her some cold cuts.
Can we hop back? I'm sorry. Yeah. I intended, but you got me sidetracked. I liked the line there about when she goes up to Steele from the script.
Right.
Remington, meanwhile, has only lightly resisted being cornered by Nancy, who makes her assault on him about as subtly as the First Army at Omaha Beach.
Yeah, that is a good. That's good. I like it.
Sometimes reading the stage directions and the descriptions of these characters or these scenes, that's as much fun as the episode itself sometimes.
Oh, yeah, it really is. I mean, and to go to the script here, Stella is described as a chunky, big-hearted woman with high spirits and few illusions. Terry, 25, is a sweet, shy, overly book-learned associate professor of English literature at a local college. So, we're getting these interesting little descriptions of the women as well. So, yeah, I do like that. She just lightly avoided being cornered by Nancy, who, is very persistent with Steele.
Yes.
And then we've got the gun that Laura notices in Barbara's purse as she offers her some cold cuts. Stella watches as Laura walks away and wonders what Frank saw in a tiny little thing like her. Meanwhile, I mean, she has a pulse. It seems that's all that is required for Frank. It doesn't seem like he has a particularly long list of things that he would rule out, really. So, yeah. Meanwhile, Nancy, as we said, is coming on to Steele pretty thick, saying she doesn't want to talk about her husband, but she does want to know how much Frank left her in his will. Steele walks by, or Laura walks by. Steele pulls her aside. She tells him that Barbara has a gun, and he responds, and I didn't see it. I didn't think to look in the script to see if I got this right, but he says, that raven-haired yum-yum over there has been plying me with questions about inheritance. Did I get that right? I'm going to look. Sorry, I'm looking at the script here. Yum-yum. It says, and our raven-haired yum-yum over there has been plying me with questions. So he's described her as a yum-yum, which is, that's new. It's a new term. I don't think I've ever saw someone and gone, there's a yum-yum. Have you?
No, I can't say I've ever used that term in that way. No.
I think I might start. I think I just might bring it back because, seems like a fun one. So Laura tells Steele that she's been getting a fascinating portrait of Frank and that he was all things to all women. She also says that if his case went to trial tomorrow, she would have a hard time knowing which side to root for. So she obviously shares Mildred's sentiments, even if she can't officially say that out loud. And Steele says he's glad that...
Can we hop back just a second? Just before that comment about not knowing which side to root for, when Laura came over, Steele makes this excuse about Miss Holt. I was just going over the finer points. I can see the points you were going over. Wow. You were talking earlier about not being catty? No.
Yeah, that's pretty catty.
There's a little bit of... Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely very catty. Which is funny because it's clear that he kind of looked terrified. He was trying to get away from Mary. Or sorry, Nancy. God, can't even keep the women straight myself. How did Frank do it? So yeah, Stella...
very carefully.
True, yeah. He says that he's glad Frank isn't around to hear that just as the doorbell rings. Stella opens it, and it's Frank standing there with roses. For who? Who are the roses for?
I guess for all of them.
Which wife did he bring those for? Is he going to just take one out of the bouquet and distribute them?
Sure.
How is that going to work? So we have that. Stella opens it. She starts to choke him. She jumps on him, and she basically attacks him. Mary faints. The others look properly horrified. I think Barbara chokes on something she's eating or spits it out, one or the other. So it's a dramatic reveal, you might say.
Yes.
And then we switch. Steele is desperately trying to herd the women out of the loft, claiming Frank is ill. As he does so, Mildred appears looking very contrite. Steele pretends that she's a doctor, tells her to go treat her patient, as he says, "Good night, Mrs. Dannon. Good night, Mrs. Dannon. Good night, Mrs. Dannon."
Good night, John boy. Good night.
Oh, that is it's a good gag. It really fits. It's funny, right? They knew what they were doing with that one. So yeah, he gets rid of the women. Laura berates him for ruining all the work that they've done thus far and giving the fact that he's alive away. Sorry, berates Frank, not Steele, obviously. Steele then tells him all the things that he's posed as, and Mildred calls it disgusting. Sorry, he tells all the things that Frank is posed as.
Laura's line.
Yeah. It's good.
Mildred, we're professionals. We've been hired to protect Mr. Dannon, and we will do so to the best of our ability, regardless of our personal feelings, whatever they may be. You swine.
Yeah, she just hates him at this point. The scene fades.
So that's two against him now.
I can't imagine anybody would find this, even the most liberal-minded of thinking person of thought, I meant to say, would appreciate or approve of somebody deceiving people this way. Like, they're not on board with this.
It's just funny to see Laura do the switch, because earlier it was no. We can't judge.
Feelings,
we can't judge. Judging. And it's like, yes. Now it's
you swine.
I'm not judging you, you pig.
You jerk. Yeah, she really doesn't like Frank either. Which I think is why he went to stay at Mr. Steele's house. Well, that, and of course the women know he's there at the loft. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So the scene fades, and we're at Steele's place. Sorry, am I in the right spot?
I don't know. I can't tell where you're at.
Yeah. Steele is leading Frank at a loft, claiming he'll be safer at his apartment. Sorry, I lost my spot. Frank asks if he really thinks he's still in danger, and Steele reminds him that not moments ago he was almost strangled by one of them. Why is he stupid enough to think these women wouldn't want him dead? Like, honestly, this guy is supposed to be able to become an aerospace engineer, a neurosurgeon, an antique dealer, a truck. Like, how does he not? How is he this naive? Like, how could you not be aware that you're lying to these women is going to make them angry?
He has talent. It doesn't mean he's smart.
Fair.
They're not the same things at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say that he's not. But, and maybe it's not the right word to say that, or maybe it's not quite right to say that he's not smart. He is not aware of the consequences of his actions, particularly as they pertain to other people. And he doesn't understand how people would react. I almost want to say it's a little bit like being a sociopath, but not quite. You know, doesn't have the evil undertone under it. But it's still that sociopath of not being able to understand and empathize and see or to understand other people's thoughts and reactions to things.
Yeah, I mean, some neurodivergent people are like that, in the sense that with ADHD or even autism, and this is definitely not the same thing, obviously, but some of people with those neurodivergent brains have difficulty discerning social etiquette and what is and is not appropriate to say or do in certain situations. Obviously, I don't think it would ever get to this context, because, again, that I think it should be fairly obvious that you don't lie to 5 women and marry them all. But hey, here we are.
And expect them to be happy with it.
Yeah, and expect them to forgive you. He's just like, well, I'm sure if I explain the situation, like, what are you going to explain? Where is the sorry, honey, but here's my explanation. I lied to you. Like, they already know that. There's nothing that he's going to tell them that's going to add anything to the situation.
But I love you.
But I loved you, and I love her, and I love her, and I love her. Like, you know, it's not going to help. It's not going to help, Frank.
No.
Yeah. So he starts to say he can't believe one of his wives would try to kill him just as a gun fires at his head. They all duck. As the car drives off, Steele tries to get a look at it, but it's gone. They run over to where the shots came from, and that's where they find the little charm with the bell on the ground. Laura wonders if one of the ladies dropped it. She tells Steele to get Frank to bed, while she finds out if a certain gun's been fired in the last 5 minutes. So we're back at the Rossmore. Steele and Frank enter. He asks Frank if he would like a drink. There's a bottle. Here's another thing that doesn't make any sense. In addition to where did the fedora come from, there's a bottle of champagne chilling with 2 glasses that was not there before when Mildred was there.
I don't know. Maybe
did Mildred put it there as an apology? Like, oh, I'm sorry, I screwed up. Here's some champagne.
I don't know.
Like, it wasn't in the previous scene. I did not see it. I looked.
Yeah, that's true.
So
that's
it's
true.
not... Unless...
He's got a maid that comes in and fixes his drinks for him.
Maybe. Yeah. Anytime somebody's coming over and it's just... The maid just assumes it's a woman. So I better get the champagne, the glasses, fix the romantic atmosphere. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he's like Cinderella. He's got the little mice. They come in and they decorate it.
There you go.
But yeah, he's got this champagne there.
Cinderella.
Mr. Steele. Oh, yeah, maybe. Could be. Makes sense. So Frank sits down and he says, "It's just like Stella to try and choke me. She's so impulsive." Steele points out that he's remembering and says it calls for a toast. Frank is still upset. He can't remember who came at him with the hatchet. Steele warns him not to push it. Frank toasts to Mary. "I'll never forget that week in Cape Cod," which is funny because he did. To Terry, and those long nights with Dickens. And to Stella, too. A man couldn't ask for a better bowling partner. And to Barbara. There's no one with more style. And to Nancy, and those nights in front of the fire on the bearskin rug she would rub. Steele interrupts by saying, "I'll drink to that." I guess he doesn't want to hear the details about the raven-haired yum-yum on the bearskin rug, but...
I guess not.
Yeah, that's one heck of a toast. Anyway, so he points out that he's remembering, or he's already done that, sorry. And then Frank says he doesn't know how he got into this mess. Steele points out that only he has the answer to that. And he says it was fun at first. New job, new romance. And obviously Steele asks, "Well, can you recall how it started?" So here's where, things have come back to him. Maybe because of the gunshot, who knows. But he told Steele that in college he was always switching majors. Then he dropped out, enlisted in the Navy as a medical orderly. He tells him that they were in the South China Sea. They'd taken on some wounded, and the doctor collapsed. So he picked up some instruments and saved the man's life. He didn't tell anyone because it would have landed him in the brig. But he realized he had a gift where he could watch someone do something and pick it up right away. So I have two questions. I don't know if you'll have the answer for this, but would it put him in the brig if he saved somebody? Because we have here, and I only know this because we were at a festival last weekend and they were giving out free naloxone kits, which are you administer them if somebody's had an overdose. It's like fentanyl or something. You can stick, it's a needle or a nasal spray. And the guy told us that it's not going to hurt the person. If they're not having an overdose, it won't hurt them. And we're also protected by something called the Good Samaritan Act, which means that we can't be arrested or put in jail or whatever if we're trying to save a life and we screw it up, right? You see somebody by the roadside, you administer CPR, you break a rib, whatever. So would he not be protected under some sort of law similar to that? He saved this guy's life. The doctor wasn't available to operate. Well, or is the Army really strict about that stuff? Or Navy, sorry.
As a civilian, if he had done something like that as a civilian, he might have been protected. We do have a similar law I think it's nationwide here as well. I don't know when it came into play, but it wouldn't really apply to somebody in the military. This whole thing about his comment about in the Navy that would have landed me in the brig, it reminded me of something, and I couldn't remember the details, and I tried to find it, and I couldn't find the details, but my recollection is that, and I think it was said about Gregory Boynton, Pappy Boynton, about getting awarded a medal at his own court-martial. And that is exactly the sort of thing that would happen in the military. Oh, you did this great, fantastic thing. Yeah, we're going to give you an award just before we court-martial you for doing something you weren't supposed to do. That sounds about normal for the military.
Okay, fair enough.
So, yeah.
Makes me think of the movie Speed, where he shoots the hostage and gets a medal for it at the end. He says, oh, okay, well, the very opening scene, he shoots his partner. They're two cops. He shoots his partner who's being held hostage by a terrorist, and he shoots him, and the terrorist drops him, and then therefore gets away, and he stops the bomb from going off or whatever, and then they're standing on the stage, and they're getting medals, and he says, "You shot me. I can't believe it. They're giving you a medal for shooting me." It's just, and he says, "Harry, you told me to." It's just a cute little exchange where he gets a medal for shooting his partner, so. But yeah, so that was my first question. And my other question was, he says he could see somebody do something and then pick it up right away.
Mm-hmm.
Even if this was the case, he would still have to shadow some of these professions a long time to figure out everything, would he not? Like, neurosurgeon is a pretty complicated job. Each surgery would be different. You wouldn't be able to just like, oh, okay, I've seen you do one brain surgery. Cool, I've got it. I can do all of them now. Like, I would assume that would take some time. And you'd have to be in some sort of position of, you'd have to have some more educational qualifications unless you fraudulently manufacture them.
Well, I would presume that that's what he did, is he manufactured documentation to prove that he was this, that, or the other thing. That was the whole premise of Frank Abagnale Jr.'s career, was that he was creating these fraudulent identities complete with fraudulent certifications and documentations to prove that he was this thing. So, I mean, it happens. Now, as far as the first part of that, yeah, you're right. I mean, you'd have to spend a lot of time to learn neurosurgery.
Yeah.
You're right. It
or
wouldn't be just one surgery.
Engineering.
Yeah.
I mean, truck driving, not so much. I mean, you figure out how to drive the truck, you're good to go, right? Mm-hmm. Same with running an antique store but a history professor, what kind of history? Are you an expert in World War II, or is it, the Declaration of Arbroath in 13th century Scotland? Like, you'd need a
my thinking here as we're talking about it is that he had some talent, and so he could pick up some basic things.
Right.
And he wasn't an expert at any of these things. He was just talented enough to be able to pass himself off with some basic understandings of things. And then, like in the story of Frank Abagnale, he didn't really do anything, with the exception of being a lawyer, because he actually did pass the bar. But he would be in these situations where he was expected to do something, and he would sort of defer to other people and then take the credit for it.
I don't know about you, but I want my neurosurgeon to be really good at his job. Like, not just be able to pass muster, but like, I want that guy to be, anyway, I want Dr. Strange, okay? Like, I don't want,
Well, but did you see the movie Catch Me If You Can? There's a sequence in there where he's portraying a doctor, and he doesn't really actually do any doctoring. They call him in to consult because he's the doctor on he's the senior doctor on the floor. And, well, what do you think? So, oh, that's right. Okay, that's good. What do you think? Yeah, that's good. So he never actually he never actually practiced medicine. He just was there in a position, and then he managed and delegated. So I can see that maybe Frank did something like that too.
I mean, maybe. I would hope so, because if you're operating someone's brain, you kind of need to know what you're doing. But either way, Steele, he's kind of identifying with Frank in a way, because he says, certainly you saw your life as different than most men. You didn't have to be trapped in a single identity. No one could tell you what to do. Frank seems pleased that...
Again, Steele is here he's talking about Frank ostensibly, but he's really talking about himself. And again, he's talking to strangers, telling more about his life to strangers than he is to Laura.
And sort of seeing himself in those strangers.
That's right. Yeah.
But to a point, because like Frank seems pleased at first that he understands him. Steele asks how the women fit in, and he says it just happened. He fell in love, got married, got married her, and married her too. He says he's just an old-fashioned guy, and this is where Steele sort of deviates from whatever compassion or identification he has with Frank, because he says, well, did you ever consider how they might feel about it? Which is a good question, because clearly he didn't. Right? Like, I think they're alike in some basic ways, but there are big differences, because Steele, as much as he's been with many women in his past, very likely, I don't think he's ever unless it was a mark or somebody he was conning, he's probably been pretty upfront with what this is. I don't think Gail or Nadine or Felicia even expected marriage and kids and a white picket fence. Like, I don't think he was ever going to give those illusions to people. So that's kind of where they dovetail, where they split, right? When he says that, well, did you ever think of how they might feel about it? He knows what it's like to be restless, to wander from place to place, to want to put his talents to use and live outside the laws of society, but he's also been towing the straight and narrow for a year now. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, gained some empathy and perspective. So he asks Frank if he ever considered that. Right.
Well, I think part of the difference is that, well, we know that Steele, through his various personas and the incarnations of his life, he had Daniel.
Yes.
Daniel, for all of his faults, Daniel seems to be the sort of person who would take him to task. In fact, he kind of alluded to it in that conversation that he had with Laura while they were waltzing. And so Steele was called to task, and he was at a young age, or a younger age, made to be aware of the consequences of his actions on other people. Now, that didn't stop him from being a criminal, but he at least in terms of his relationships with women, and I would imagine just in general, was aware of how the other person's going to feel and respond to this situation. I'm not sure Frank ever had that. I don't know. Obviously, we don't know anything about his past life, his childhood, his growing up years, his life as an adult, even other than what he tells us. But it's almost as if nobody had ever called him to task and said, look, you're doing all these things and it's all about you. But what about these other people? Because there are other people involved.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what I think we see a little bit of that here in his next statement, where Steele is talking to him about commitment, and Frank says, well, what kind of commitments did I make? I was playing roles, imagining I was putting something over on life, when in fact I was only fooling myself. And again, he's still wrapped up in himself, but he's at least starting to acknowledge that commitment wasn't something he was actually doing.
Yeah.
Even despite the fact that he was marrying these women, it was a sham marriage. There wasn't any actual commitment there.
No, he wasn't planning on settling down with them and retiring with them. And I mean, he might, I don't know how long he
thought, I don't
know how long he thought he could keep the charade going, but it clearly couldn't be something you could sustain. Not conceivably, not with any real logic.
And there are people who, for various reasons, maybe it's because of the drug and alcohol, either as an adult or a teen, or even as in pre-birth fetal alcohol syndrome, fetal drug syndrome, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There are people, and also people who just have mental capacities that don't allow them to see beyond this step and that step. They can't see into the future. They can't follow the chain of events from where they're at and combine that with their actions and see what the consequences of those things are going to be down the line. And that's basically Frank here. He doesn't see down into the future. He doesn't see far enough to say, well, what am I going to do, at this point when this happens? Because inevitably this will happen.
No, he's too busy. He's too busy collecting wives like they're Pokemon. He's got to catch them all.
Baseball cards.
Yeah. To be fair, you're right. He does admit that he hadn't thought of how they would feel. And he comments that it's a shame the hatchet missed. And Steele says, well, that's a bit extreme. And so they're kind of meeting in the middle, because Steele he admits that he was too scared to make a real commitment. And Steele says it's not an uncommon failing. So he's extending him, I think, more grace than the audience or Laura or Mildred would in that sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think more grace than he's really I realize this is a contradiction, but more grace than he's deserving of, because if it's grace, it's not something you deserve. But
no,
it's certainly more grace than you would expect someone to give him, because again, he's really still not even focusing on the consequences for the women. He's looking at the consequences for himself.
Yeah. And
still all
he's
about
still
him.
not he's still not thinking of them, basically. And so but I mean, at least it kind of gives, I think the function of the scene is to give us a bit of insight into Steele, right? He's recognizing that he himself has been kind of lying to himself, playing all these roles, pretending he's putting one over on life, when in reality he's being cheated out of something real, a human connection. He has Daniel, sure, but he's not always with Daniel, and now he's kind of like adrift, right? He's been without a place or roots or family or anything like that. So it kind of feels
also to suggest that up to this point he has been not unwilling to make a commitment, but just unable to make a commitment, because his comment is to Frank, look at it this way, at least you're capable of making a commitment. And that's when Frank says, what kind of commitments did I make?
Yeah.
But Steele is saying, look, I have trouble making commitments.
Mm-hmm.
And I might want to, but there's a part of me that just, I can't get over it. I can't get to that point.
Yeah, there's that wanderlust that he knows is there that might take hold at any minute, and then he's off on a new adventure. So, much like The Littlest Hobo, the show that my daughter was watching. I'm sorry. So, he says it's been a tough day. He offers to sleep on the couch and give Frank the bed. Very kind of him. He's always offering his bed to other people, even though supposedly the unprecedented honor of sleeping in it is what he offered Laura. But Frank goes into the bedroom. Frank takes him up on the offer, goes into the bedroom, and Nancy's there. So obviously people can get in and out of this room fairly easily. How long has she been here? Has she just been waiting for him to pop on in? Like it... It's an interesting...
Apparently.
So she'd just been hanging out there, just waiting for Frank. It could have been Steele that came. I guess maybe it didn't matter.
Because after all, Steele's the lawyer. And she can, take advantage of that. So,
She basically comes on to Frank, and then we switch over to Laura, showing up at Barbara's house. Laura asks what she's doing there. She tells her someone took some shots at Frank. Barbara seems worried about him, and Laura says he's all right. She suggests moving into the study. Barbara says she's not sure what Laura's doing there, and Laura tells her... It's interesting. Barbara is the only one that Laura reveals herself to. The rest of the women, they stay pretty tight-lipped with and keep their personas. But Barbara says she's... Laura... She says she sounds like the police, because Laura says she had the gun in her purse, not to mention means, motive, and opportunity. Barbara says she sounds more like the police, and Laura says she is the private kind and Frank is her client. She could have lied and said, well, yes, I am actually a police officer. Like, she could still
that would be
engaged to Frank.
That would be illegal. That would be a crime.
Well, I mean, how many things has Laura done that's
true.
Illegal? Like, come on.
I knew that as I was saying that, I knew that would come up.
Ethics? Question mark? Like...
Yes, I as soon as it was out of my mouth, I knew it was a mistake.
So she tells Laura that she might be right about the means, but not the motive. She owes him more than she could ever repay. She goes on to say that when she first met Frank, she was a successful dress designer, but that Frank showed her that it was all hollow without someone to share it with. She also says her success meant nothing, and that he saved her from becoming a cold, hard woman. Ugh. I hate this. I hate all of this. It really seems like they're trying to sell the idea that you're only whole as a woman if you have a husband. Otherwise, you're just, you've got all your millions, but you're crying. And I get it. The idea behind it being that people need people regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. Like, you can't be without human connection or whatever. But like, her success meant nothing? Like, I'm sorry.
I didn't take it quite that way myself. I took it more as a, he taught me to stop and smell the roses type thing. Not that she had any problem with being successful, but that her success was becoming obsessive to her at the expense of other parts of her life. And he taught her to, okay, he taught me how to love again. Okay, she does say that. But I took it more in the general sense of, he taught me that this isn't the only thing that matters. Not that it doesn't matter, but it's not the only thing that matters. That's how
I guess maybe it's in the dialogue, and I don't know. There is, I think, a slight element of gender dynamics at play, because you don't often see the same scene in reverse with a man, right? Like, you usually, if a man is successful but unable to commit, that's just, oh, ho hum, that's just men, right? Like, Steele comments on it about being unable to make this commitment. Frank is obviously committing to many people, somewhat erroneously, but still doing so. But I don't think you've ever seen a character that's a successful businessman, say, who has, I mean, maybe it's happened, I don't know, but it just feels very like, oh, he taught me to love again, so I don't hate his guts, and I'd never shoot at him. And I'm like, well, but you should kind of hate him, though. Even if you didn't try to kill him, you should kind of hate him.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with that part, but yeah, and I guess I'm going to say, as far as your other point about the behavior of men,
I'm not saying men are like that. I'm saying Hollywood presents them.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah. But I would have to submit pretty much any movie from Nora Ephron as my counter argument.
Fair. Okay. Good point.
Because that is exactly the premise of every single one of her movies.
Yep. Yeah, true.
And I'll admit, I love her movies. Hey, I love to sit down with my wife to watch those.
They are great movies. I 100% agree with you. No argument here.
Well, it's just not the kind of thing that a lot of guys would admit to. Can we agree to that?
I think that's and it's a male that wrote this episode, and I don't know if that matters, but Nora Ephron, being a female director, would have written it differently. Yeah. So maybe that's just the
absolutely.
I still think she should hate him. I don't think she should shoot him, but I definitely think she should hate him.
Feel betrayed by him? Definitely.
Yeah. Because so Laura asks to see her purse. She hands it over, and it's empty.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's the big reveal. Yeah. Then we switch back to Frank and Nancy, who are making out on Steele's bed. Nancy suggesting they run away and get a hotel like they did that weekend in Pittsburgh. She then says she doesn't care about those other girls, and she couldn't care about them the way he couldn't care about them the way he does about her. Steele walks in.
Not the brightest woman in the world.
She really isn't. No, unfortunately, she is dumber than a sack of hammers. And Steele walks in, sees Frank, and asks what's to stop her from taking him to a nice hotel and slitting his throat. Nancy asks why she would do that, and Steele points out that all she talked about that evening was her inheritance. Frank guesses that she's still having money problems. Nancy says that she has overextended herself a bit, but she wouldn't harm a hair on her Frank's head. He's the only man who's ever respected her for more than just her body.
Can I?
I don't think that's true.
Well,
I don't think he does.
Well, okay. Maybe he doesn't, but that is her opinion. And I think that there is... I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm defending Frank. I
it's
think
hard, isn't it? You're like, I don't want to say.
I think there is an element of truth in it, because he doesn't talk to her like she's... granted, he doesn't respect the women at all because of how he's behaved, the fact that he's married all these women. And to him, it's no big deal. But he doesn't talk to her as if she's just a piece of meat, a body. So I think there is an element of that. And in fact, I've got written down here that there's a connection here between Nancy and Stella, because both of them use that same basic phrase, that he respected both of them for more than their bodies. She says, more than my body. Stella says, this isn't exactly a body men lust after, but I'll tell you something, Frank made me feel like a queen.
It's
Roses,
interesting.
candlelight dinner, the works.
Yeah.
So I would say that for all Frank's flaws,
and there are many,
and the fact that he's such a contemptible person and does not respect these women as people, I think Nancy's kind of right.
I think as well, it's interesting you pointed out the dichotomy between her and Stella, because I never would have put them in the same category, but you're right in the sense that for both of them, their body was the stumbling block, or at least in their head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, who has a great body, is probably only ever finding men that want to sleep with her and don't care about her as a human being. And Stella, probably the opposite, in that she's having difficulty finding a man who isn't, I don't want to say shallow, but focused on looks over substance, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. You know, and the thing about Stella is that, and I'm going to say that this was part of the character as they created it.
Yeah.
If Stella as a person, if she was a real person and she dressed differently,
oh yeah, easily,
she would be much. She's not doing herself any favor with the clothes
that's
that she's wearing.
Hideous dress that they've got her in, but they're doing, obviously it's part of the character, as you said, but like,
exactly.
Yeah. And that hair, like there's no reason that woman could not be considered attractive.
Yes, absolutely.
But they've done her up.
She's redheaded.
Yeah. Redheads are gorgeous.
Oh yeah. like, sorry.
No.
My wife is not a redhead, so I got to be careful.
Well, but I mean, a little bit of Monica, a little bit. Anyway, yeah. So you're right. It's a good point that I think also the fact that he presented himself as a neurosurgeon to Nancy probably helped her in the assumption that he loves her for more than just her body, because why would a neurosurgeon, a man who literally knows the science of the brain and you've got to be pretty smart to become a neurosurgeon, theoretically. A man like that would want somebody who theoretically was at least somewhat intellectually his equal.
Yeah.
Or that he could carry on a conversation with, right? You wouldn't want just a piece of meat, I would think. I mean, I could be wrong. There's probably
you
shallow neurosurgeons out
there.
I
avoided it. You said the phrase, I avoided it. I deliberately avoided it, but there you go. Piece of meat.
Yeah, well, I mean, so anyway, they're on the bed. Yeah. Steele kind of points that out. Nancy defends him. She's kind of clutching him to her chest there. And Frank asks, isn't she something? And Steele says, yeah, she's something. So, yeah, we have a scene change. Laura returns to the loft. I love the door on her loft. Just got to say, I
the
love
barn door.
It's so cool.
Oh, yeah.
It's just so cool. Like, for the longest time, I wanted a door like that.
My wife and I have talked about over the years all the different types of houses that we would love to have, and that's one of the things that we agree on, is that we love that kind of a door.
Yeah, it's just so cool. Yeah. So she comes in, she turns around to find Stella there, pointing a gun at her, asking where he is. The scene kind of fades out, then back in again. It's been some time that's passed. We see Stella, who's pacing with the gun, saying that Laura had said Frank would be there 10 minutes ago. Laura's trying to calm her. She says this is her life on the line. And she bitterly says Frank's got it made because he's got the pick of the litter. Laura points out that she's not going to let Frank walk into a bullet, especially since she already missed once. She assumes she's the one who shot at him. She seems shocked and says, me shoot Frank? You must be joking. To which Laura replies, somehow you'd be more convincing without the gun. Stella then goes on to say that Laura will never understand. She says she doesn't have a body that men lust after, but as you said before, Frank made her feel like a queen. Candlelight dinners and roses. Then she says things can't go back to the way they were before, so who is he going to choose? Ugh, I don't like this either, because, and this fits Stella's character, so I'm not saying I don't think it fits her, because I think it does. She's got pretty low self-esteem. In her mind, it is a choice. She's not the one that's going to walk away because she thinks she can't do any better. So
in her mind, it's all about the physical, which is,
it's a shame.
That's.
But I mean, women there's lots of people out there like that who feel that they don't have anything to offer if they're not pretty, and unfortunately society does play into that, and it probably did very much so as well in the 80s. So we've got a woman who feels that she's
probably
hollow.
Even more so in the 80s.
Yeah, unless she has Frank, she needs him to validate her. She goes on to say that, you think 140 pounds of cellulite can compete with you or any of those other broads? I'd like to know, is the writer aware that 140 pounds is not fat by any metric? Ever? Like, I don't care how short you are. That's still pretty good. Like,
well, in Hollywood, in the media, that's fat. I remember, you're familiar with the Sports Illustrated annual swimsuit edition, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when, or maybe it was shortly after it first started, I remember reading an article about some of the models. I will admit that I was familiar with some of them. Christy Brinkley in particular was one that was very interesting, because she was late teens, I think, when she first modeled on the Sports Illustrated, and she still had what they called baby, her not baby fat in the sense that she'd been pregnant and had a baby.
Right. No, I get what you're saying.
She's still, at her adolescent body fat.
Yeah.
And I remember there was an article where some of the models were being interviewed, and they said that the lady who was in charge of picking the models for those first, half a dozen years or whatever it was they loved her, because they would go in, and instead of being told, well, I could use you if you'd lose 10 pounds, she would say, I could use you if you'd put on 10 pounds.
Yeah.
What?
Wow.
You want me to put, really? Yeah. Seriously? That was their attitude, is, I can't believe that this woman would actually, they'd never heard that before, because in Hollywood, it's the skinnier, the skinnier, the skinnier. And as far as I'm concerned, no.
No, it's ridiculous. Like, it just, that comment was sad to me, that she says 140 pounds of cellulite. Like, I'm sorry, but
if she were 2'7", that might be, like, noticeable. But no, at her height, I don't know what her height is, but based on visual, again, like I said, the reason she looks,
it's the dress,
overly heavy, is exactly.
She's in a dress that does not compliment her at all. I'm not a fashion expert, but like,
what's the term? Curvy?
Yeah. Like,
what's wrong with curves?
No, nothing. No,
I didn't think so.
And obviously Frank doesn't think so, even though he's not a very good metric to use here. But
yeah, really.
Because he likes everybody. So he's very,
democratic in his tastes.
Yeah, exactly. So Laura calls Stella over to come over and sit with her, and says that trying to force themselves upon him is only going to make it worse. He has to want to come to them. Obviously, she's not talking about Frank here for herself.
No.
Without that, they will only drive him further away. She says love doesn't work on demand. I love that line, though. Like, as much as it's
a great conversation.
It's a really good conversation. I like that Laura gets a similar conversation that Steele has in this episode. That we get juxtaposed conversations where they're both Steele revealing that he's still wishing he could make a commitment and not there yet, and Laura saying, like, I can't force him to come to me. Love doesn't work like that. I have to be patient. Like, it's nice. It's a good little back and forth exchange, and it fits well with the episode. So this was well done, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty sure, though, that Frank is not worth the effort. He's a perfect example of throw the whole man back. Like, just... So, yeah. Laura suggests she hang on to the gun. Stella hands it over. Laura sniffs it and looks surprised. Although, I don't know that it would still... Would you be able to tell that long afterwards that it had been fired or not? Or...
Well,
I'm looking at you like you're a gun expert. I don't know. I just know nothing about
guns. Well, I was in the military.
Well, then okay, yeah,
I won't say
more
military.
about guns.
I was in the Air National Guard for six years. I worked security and law enforcement, so I handled
held
weapons.
a gun. You've shot a gun. I've never even seen one up close, except for once in Arizona in a tombstone when they were doing like little. Anyway.
If a gun has been fired and it has not been cleaned properly, you will still smell it.
Okay.
However, that doesn't tell you how long it's been, because
true.
Initially, the smell of the gunpowder is fairly obvious and fairly strong, but it diminishes quickly. So after that initial diminishing, it doesn't give you any information. So at this point, as long as it's been since that shot was fired at Frank, Laura couldn't tell if it had been fired that night or a week ago.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I don't think, at least based on my experience.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So we've got a switch. Steele is kind of adorably tucking Frank in on the couch in his office. It's kind of cute. He's doing it with his jacket. He comes out of the room and thanks Mildred for coming in to stay with Frank, as this is the last safe place for him. He tells her she can sleep in Laura's office. He's got a nice leather jacket on. I've got to say, in terms of wardrobe choices, I like that coat. I wonder if it's the same one Laura was wearing in Red Holt, because she was wearing his clothing and she also had a leather jacket on that looked very similar. Anyway, sorry.
I would think that the costumer would have, okay, these are the ones that we use for this character on a regular basis. And so if Laura's going to be wearing his clothes, she would go to that rack.
Yeah.
But that's just a presumption on my part. That's how I would do it.
Yeah. Mildred says she can't do that. She tells him she has come to tender her resignation because she failed him on her first major assignment. She is nearly in tears. Dolores Roberts, you absolutely brilliant human. Holy cow. Like, she brings this scene up. Like, just elevates it to genuine human emotion. Like, you're just so heartbroken for her because she's just so sad. And you just want to hug her.
The comments from our previous episodes where I was talking about how Doris Roberts had gotten to the point in the industry where she didn't have to audition for a part.
Yeah,
basically.
This is why.
Because she just nails it, which is why she got this job at all, is because she just nails it.
Yeah. She knows exactly how to play this. And it's just, you're just so sad. You just want to hug her, right? He tries to reassure her, saying they all make mistakes. And she says, "Not you, sir." And she calls herself a fraud. She's just some washed up bureaucrat who should be home knitting instead of trying to be something she's not. And you're just, Mildred, come give me a hug. Like, she's just so upset, right? He gets her to sit down. He says that she might not realize it, but she is an asset to the agency. She's intensely loyal, a dedicated worker, someone who relishes those dreary tasks that most people detest. And she says, "Well, you're just being kind." And he pauses a moment, clearly deliberating something. And then he says, "Then let's talk about frauds. You're looking at one of the biggest frauds you've ever seen." He says, "I'm not Remington Steele." And she says, "You're not?" And he replies, "Well, not the Remington Steele that you think I am." And this quote is important. He says, "I know I appear to be a super sleuth with all the answers, dapper, debonair, worldly, but it's all an act, one conceived by Miss Holt, and that I work very hard to maintain in order to support the agency's image. She's the real detective. If I am anything more than a figurehead, I owe it to her. I've made more mistakes since I've been with Laura than I care to remember, but I'm still here, Mildred." Okay, so here's the debate that I've seen in the Steele Watchers group, because somebody had asked a while ago why Mildred was so shocked, or why they didn't tell her until season 4. And in my head, at least how I read this, he did. He tells her here.
Yeah. He did. He didn't come right out and give her the whole backstory.
No, but he says
about how the agency had been running for several years without him even being there, because he didn't start the agency. I can see where somebody would say, well, he didn't tell her, because he didn't say that he was not the original Remington Steele who founded the agency,
right,
and that he brought Laura on as an investigator, and she was making him look good because she was such a good detective. I can see the argument there, but he did say, I am not Remington Steele. And he kind of catches himself and says, well, I'm not the Remington Steele you think I am.
You think I am, yeah.
Yeah. So,
and he says he's a figurehead. He says he's little more. He maintains the agency's image. That's all he's there for. He says that. Yeah. And I think he left out the other stuff because that wasn't his story to tell.
And it wasn't really relevant to the conversation at this point. Now, I think that he basically did tell Mildred.
Yeah,
Mildred
I think so
didn't hear it.
No, she chose not to hear it.
She did not hear a word he said about that.
She just heard that he was being kind and trying to keep her and whatever else. But like, yeah, she did not file that away in her brain of, oh, he's a figurehead and Laura's the real detective. But I love how he says, we'll find our way together. Whether or not she heard it, he's genuine here with her. And I don't think he's never said to anybody, I'm a fraud. Laura's the one who's pulled me along. Like he didn't say that to Daniel. Like this is the first time he admits very real vulnerability. Again, not to Laura, but like he owes it to her. He's made all these mistakes. He's still here.
And what's her name? The gal from Steele in the News.
Agnes Fowler.
Agnes Fowler, yeah. I believe him to be a fraud.
Yes.
She confronted him directly, and his response was to sidestep.
Yeah, he sidesteps it, but here he says it.
Yeah. So, yes.
And it's beautiful. Like
very important conversation.
It's just, yeah, I love it. Mildred nods. She's in tears. He leaves her there until morning. And then we get the fountain scene. I don't know LA geography, but if anybody knows what fountain this is, I'm very curious. Because it looks like a big fountain, but I don't know where. But yeah, she asks where Frank is. He tells her. He also tells her that he had a talk with Mildred. Laura asks if he told her. She says yes. She says everything, and he says within reason, which, again, you're right. It wasn't relevant for her to add all this, or for him to add all the stuff about how the agency got started and blah, 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 blah. He told her everything, in my opinion. He told her. Yeah. She asks how she took it, and he says it was a shock, but she'll get over it. Laura points out that it must have been difficult. And he, rather honestly, says telling the truth is something he works very hard to avoid. Which, again, we see parallels with him and Frank, although very different people, obviously.
Can I correct you a little bit?
Yeah.
Because you said that his response is that telling the truth is something he works very hard to avoid. And what he said was, yes, I've always worked hard. Past tense. And
increasingly so. Yeah.
Increasingly so, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So you're right.
That line is interesting. Well, why is he afraid? It's more becoming increasingly more past
It's like a rueful reluctance. Like, oh God, I'm going to be honest here again, aren't I? Like it's one of those things
or I can't believe I'm actually changing.
Yeah.
How did this happen? Yeah. This was not part of the plan.
Yeah, like it's kind of one of those, like, he's realizing now he has an honor code that he never had before, and he's like, crap. She's the Jiminy Cricket, and he's a little annoyed. But then she tells him he's rapidly becoming the man she envisioned when she created Remington Steele. This is high praise, that statement, right? Like, that is a big thing. She goes on to add honest.
She created a fantasy. She created a fantasy that no
one could ever
live up to.
No.
And yet he's getting close.
He's getting there.
Yeah, exactly. High praise.
Again, when she says honest, I would say that comes with an asterisk because he's not always.
Caring, maybe a couple of them.
Yeah. Caring, courageous, good-humored. All of those I think are accurate. Then she kisses him and adds sexy, which is, I think, the only time in the series we've ever heard her say sexy to him. So,
and I'm gonna say that, you put an asterisk behind the word honest, and I'm gonna say that yes, it deserves an asterisk, but I think in a way it almost doesn't, because he's not honest in the sense that Laura would necessarily ascribe to the word. But he is honest within his concept of honest. He tries to be honest. Sometimes Sometimes he has to massage the truth a little bit, but there's a difference between massaging the truth and telling the truth from a certain perspective, as opposed to just flat out lying.
Well, he's not Frank Dannon, I think, is where that's going with it. He'll tell a lie when he needs to, but he wouldn't do that to somebody. So yeah, they start kissing again, and he comments on how satisfying it is to kiss her without Mildred interrupting, or phones going, or bullets flying. She agrees with him. The fountain water rises in a not so subtle innuendo as the scene fades out. I mean, okay, family show, so we'll just leave it at that. But
yes,
yeah, up Periscope. Then we switch. They are in the office with pictures of the women on a corkboard. Laura says she thinks they can eliminate Barbara. And Steele
an issue.
Yep.
I have an issue. On what grounds?
There
is no rational reason for this.
No, there isn't whatsoever. I mean, just because that gun was taken from her purse doesn't mean she couldn't have another one.
That's right.
Or, or maybe she fired it and left it at the scene and Stella found it. Like, I agree. That was in my notes. But I guess we only have 40 some odd minutes of the episode, so we gotta eliminate some suspects. Yeah. Steele points out that Nancy didn't hurt him when she had the chance, which, again, I would think...
At least he has plausible rationale behind his comment.
Well, true, but Nancy was trying to get him out of the room, so...
Yeah, it's not necessarily solid. I'm not saying it's solid. I'm just saying that at least he has something that he is offering as justification for his comment.
Yeah. Mildred takes that picture off the board. Laura points out that Stella might have had the gun, but it wasn't fired. And an imaginative killer wouldn't likely choke Frank to death in a room full of witnesses. That's the only one I see as being somewhat logical. Mm-hmm. Because if Stella were a killer, she probably would have shot Laura too. And she certainly wouldn't have just handed over the gun. Especially when the gun would have had fingerprints, etc. Like, that's, I think, the only one you could legitimately assume is innocent. Steele comments that just leaves Terry and Mary, which I don't think is a accident that they rhyme. And then he says that Terry is shy, sweet, a college professor whose only excitement is Victorian novels, which means it's definitely her. Laura asks how she knows that, and he says it's always the least likely suspect, and that the only at the moment, only one he could suspect more would be the butler if there was one. Which, stay tuned, folks. And then Laura, on the other hand, points out that Mary had a violent reaction to seeing Frank alive, theorizing that her fainting was in reaction to seeing a man she murdered back from the grave. She also adds that she has an accent, which is a dead giveaway.
What has happened to our detectives?
I don't know.
This is no more rational than deciding somebody's guilt by throwing darts. I mean, there is no... If you're reading a mystery novel... then, or watching a TV show, then yes, the person that is the most likely is either the person who is most predominant or least predominant in the episode.
Yeah.
Or in the book, or whatever. But yeah, I mean, in real life, that wouldn't work. And the accent thing, I never heard of that.
Well, also, Nancy had a far thicker accent than Mary did. Nancy had this cute Southern accent. She was going, well, I wouldn't harm a hair on his head, right? Like, that's terrible. It's my interpretation of it. It's really bad. But, like, I didn't really hear an accent from Mary personally. And I think that was a dig.
Subtle.
That was a dig at Steele. I'm pretty sure. Because he says, well, lots of people have accents. Like, he's annoyed by that comment, right? So,
But yeah. And you're probably right. It is a dig at him. But I think Mary did have a very, very slight accent, but certainly nothing like Nancy's.
Nancy's was far, y'all. But, and also, Stella had one too. Stella had an accent too.
Yeah, she did.
It was more like New Yorkish sounding, but yeah. So, but I think the reason Laura made that comment was that we're used to Steele being silly and ridiculous in how he decides who the killer is, because that's what he does. It's very similar to Castle, who decides the killer based on how he would write it in one of his mystery books. Yeah. So I think this is just Laura being silly and stooping to his level and making a dig. Because he says highly conclusive evidence. Some of the nicest people he knows have accents. Frank then jumps up and exclaims that this isn't getting them anywhere. Laura pulls out the charm and suggests maybe this will. Frank says he gave the charm to each of his wives as a trademark. This is what serial killers do. Sorry. So Steele says their job is simple. Find out which of their suspects is missing the trinket. And then, of course, Laura says, the worst pun, it would work like a charm. So we first have them approach Mary. She's gardening. Laura reintroduces Steele as Sterling Gillette. He reaches for Mary's hand, notices that she does indeed have the charm. When he comments on it, she says that Frank gave it to her and she always wears it. They kiss. Frank then says he has to go because they have a job to do, but Laura and Steele think that he's safe with Mary because she has the charm. So
sure,
they leave him there. And I don't know why I guess to do their job thoroughly, they feel like they have to check out Terry, or at least, I guess, arrest her. But they go to the university looking for Terry. Steele makes a comment on how Laura is taking Mary's innocence quite well, and Laura says she's not. Steele reminds her when they find Terry, they will find a vicious killer who has tried bullets, arrows, and is capable of anything. What they do find, however, is poor Terry sobbing her eyes out. This is the reaction I expected from each and every one of the women. This reaction here, right? Being upset, being angry, feeling betrayed. Like, Terry is the only one who's behaving logically, as far as I'm concerned. So she's crying her eyes out. She hasn't been able to stop crying since the night before. She notices her hand's been in her pocket this whole time. She says Frank was kind, funny, and a creep.
Yeah.
Which surprises Steele and Laura. Steele then realizes that Terry had no idea Frank was 5-timing her. He throws her the Kleenex, which she catches with the other hand, causing Laura to notice the bracelet is indeed on her wrist. She comments on it, saying she admires it. Terry tells them that Frank gave it to her on their wedding day and that the date is engraved on the charm. Steele looks at the one that they have. Laura pulls out a book. Where did the book come from? Where were they? Okay. Did you see a book?
Her notes?
Yeah, I guess. But I guess somewhere along the line she wrote down all their wedding dates?
Apparently.
So anyway,
she just got it.
She looks it up, shuts it, terrified as she realizes that that's Frank and Mary's wedding day, which means he's with the wife who's trying to kill him.
Can I ask a question about the charms at this point?
Yeah.
Does anybody know their job? If that was left at the scene of an attempted shooting,
right,
and you viewed it as evidence, wouldn't you examine it a little more closely than just,
think.
Cute charm?
Yeah, you would think.
Why didn't they see the date before this? Because we needed to fill out 48 minutes.
Well, and obviously,
that's
because
work.
If she had looked and seen the date, then she would know when she examined Mary's wrist that it wasn't there, and then they wouldn't have left Frank with her.
Yeah,
you're right.
They would have been able to tell from the date. Well, the charm was left by the person who took the shot. The date matches Mary's wedding anniversary. So, yeah.
So they run back. Frank and Mary are kissing. Frank says he forgot how much he loves just being with Mary. Mary says she's grateful that he explained everything, and now that he's back, he will never leave her side again. He says that's how he feels too. She stops and says that she's a mess. He says she's never looked better, but she tells him she needs to go clean up. As she leaves, the clock begins to chime, and he sees the bell there, and he starts to remember things. He sees the paperweight thingy that's moving back and forth with the water, which makes him think of the ocean. Then he remembers Mary coming at him with a hatchet. He stands up as the memory comes back to him, and Mary comes out of the room with a crossbow in her hands. Tells him he's been a tough man to kill, not like the others. You've been a real challenge. Okay, somebody worse than Frank in this episode. Who knew?
Hey, Frank has been redeemed.
Yeah, he's now a model citizen because she's a serial killer. She goes to shoot him. When Laura walks in, she shoots in Laura's direction. Instead, the arrow goes through a book that Laura picks up just in time. And then Steele bursts through the door saying, "Where is she?" and knocks her down in the process, which is quite funny. I like that.
Which has a little bit of the Temperate Steel feel to it, where he walks in and he saves her because he's looking for a pencil.
Yeah, it does. So then we have our tag scene where they're again looking at a newspaper headline that reads, "Black Widow Killer Arrested." And then it goes on to say that Mary was responsible for the murder of 7 husbands and Frank would have been 8. Here's another question about why are they not doing their jobs. Did nobody do a thorough background check on each of the wives? Because if they
Obviously
had, wouldn't they have noticed that Mary had been married, I don't know, 7 times previous to Frank? Would that not have come up as a big red flag, especially if all of her husbands were deceased?
Well, deceased or missing. I would
or missing,
imagine
whatever,
that the husbands were missing.
Well, I would think that they would have to be declared dead for like her to not legally be married to them. Wouldn't they?
Well, yeah, you're right. You're right. They would have to be declared dead. But they could be missing, declared dead.
Either way, that's a lot of husbands that go missing, right? Like they're not St. Bernards. They should be able to find their way home, right?
So no, you're right. They should have been doing some investigating work.
You would think.
Maybe hire a detective to figure this stuff out.
Those wives are all suspects. A thorough background check. Not a hard task.
Apparently it was. Murphy wasn't there to go get the autopsy, so who's going to do it?
He wasn't. That's a good point. See, they need Murphy. They do. I will admit now they need Murphy.
Yeah.
So yeah, Frank is in total disbelief over it, and Steele comments on how she killed her husbands for their money with no passion in it whatsoever. This must be a kick in the ego to realize that she didn't even give a crap that he was 5-timing her. She just wanted his money. In fact, I think that might have been a complication because who would the money be left to? Like, did he even have a will?
5 different wills.
Yeah, maybe 5 different wills for 5 different women. Who knows? Frank is hilariously devastated, saying he loved her. And Laura, in a rare display of sympathy, says that if he hadn't, he wouldn't have developed amnesia. It was the shock of seeing someone he trusted completely try to kill him that did it. And then Mildred mutters that it was poetic justice.
What was that?
It was nice to see justice done. That's what she corrects with. Yeah. Frank asks how they knew it was Mary, and Laura explains the charm. Frank says he's learned his lesson. From now on, it's strictly the straight and narrow. He says, 1 job, 1 woman, 1 Frank Dan. And Mildred says, I hope so. She manages to maintain a tough exterior until he thanks her, and you can see her visibly soften. Mm-hmm. So I guess he has some charm, although I fail to see it. It must be there, because, yeah. So he leaves or goes to leave, and all 4 of his wives come into the office. They do not look happy. They tell them they want to talk about his future, and they all grab him and take him out of the office. Here's my question. Who do you think he picked? Or rather, who do you think walked away?
I don't know.
I think Terry walked away. I'm going to say Terry left him. And
probably
said,
because she was so upset.
Pal. She was really upset.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Just the fact that she was there, though, suggests that she might be willing to forgive and forget.
I don't know. Okay. Here's my logic. You tell me if yours matches mine. I think Terry walked away. She was pretty upset. She's the only one who called him creep.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to go.
But that was in the throes of emotion. And like I said, she's here with the other 3 to confront him, to make him make a choice. If she was going to walk away, I don't think she would have been here.
I think she still might have wanted closure, right? Like this is a big deception. I think she might have wanted to face him. I'm going to go with Terry walks away. Okay. That's my vote.
Okay. All right.
I think Stella might walk away too. I think even though she had that, after that conversation with Laura, I think that Stella might at least rethink her position on herself and realize that him picking her is not the validation that she needs. Maybe this is wishful thinking, but I think Stella walks away. That leaves us Barbara and Nancy. And honestly, I don't know, because I'm gonna say Barbara walks away because if Frank truly did teach her how to love and to respect herself and want a future that involves love, and
she would want somebody other than him.
Yeah. So I'm going to say that he keeps Nancy. I think Nancy would stick around. She's having money troubles, and she, ironically too, is insecure, but in a different way, and feels that if she's, I don't think she cares that he was married to all those other women, because she's not that bright. I think she's just happy that Frank's there. So I'm going to say it's true. I'm going to say he ends up with Nancy. What do you think?
See, I approached it from a different direction. I approached it from the standpoint of, if they all four came to him and said, pick one of us, which one would he pick? That's how, because that's, to me, that's how the scene kind of presented itself. So I narrowed it down to Terry or Stella.
Interesting. Okay.
Because I can't give you a good reason why. If I were Frank,
if you were Frank,
if I were Frank, those would be probably the two I would be trying to decide between.
I think if I were Frank, I agree. Those were the two I would decide between too. Hey, I could play this game.
That's right.
It counts. Maybe we'll leave it up and we'll ask in the comments in the Facebook group or whatever, who do you think, we'll put it open-ended, who do you think Frank ended up with? Whether he picked or they picked, who do you think Frank ended up with? Or it could be nobody. They could all say, screw you, Frank, and they could all walk away too. Maybe none of them. But yeah, I'm gonna leave us with that question. And then at the last bit here, after they go out, she says that Mildred. Laura goes back to the office, says to Mildred that she understands that Mildred had a talk with Mr. Steele, and Mildred agrees that they did. She said it was eye-opener, and that never in her wildest dreams would Mr. Steele go to such lengths to try to keep her. She says, do you know that he actually tried to convince me that you invented him? And then bursts out laughing. Here's where I think they should have tried again, because obviously it's clear that she doesn't believe him, sorry. And she says anyone who can come up with a story like that has her undying devotion, and goes right back to fixing him some tea.
I'm going to say that at this point they didn't, because it was what would be the point? She's not
it's
ready
funnier
to hear
the
story.
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
yeah, it's also true. Funnier.
That's true.
From an audience perspective.
But she's not. They could sit her down and have another talk with her, and she wouldn't believe it. Yeah. So.
I'm going to say, and my last closing thoughts about this, you can tell me whether you agree or disagree. I think this is a better follow-up to a really good episode like Red Holt Steele than, say, Steele's Gold was to Vintage. Yeah. Because I've noticed they have a habit of, well, actually, Vintage doesn't count because Vintage was not a serious episode, but most shows will follow up a very serious episode with a romp, so to speak, like in order to lighten the load, because obviously you don't want grim dark everything unless you're watching
Grimm.
Well, Grimm or Handmaid's Tale or something like that, right? So you're going to follow something up with something a little more lighthearted, but it's easy to go too far and make it goofy or stupid. And I think that's what happened. Like, not Vintage Steele was funny, but it also had a serious side of her confronting Wilson, and there is a dramatic storyline in that episode. They followed it up with Steele's Gold, which I think we both agreed was a bit too far on the ridiculous scale. It wasn't a terrible episode. We enjoyed parts of it, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. Whereas I think this episode, even though it is ridiculous, like from the logistical point of view, is a far better follow-up to Red Holt Steele than Steele's Gold was to Vintage.
Yeah, the difference between the two here is not as great as it was between those earlier two. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
It's a good one. It's a good episode. And so, I mean, that's, unless you've got any other things to add, I will mention our website, SteeleWatching.com, where you can find the show notes, links to the different films that are referenced, merch, and I think we were also going to talk about subscription. I'll let you take that one if you want.
Yeah. We don't, as you know, Sarah, we don't make a big deal about subscriptions. We don't make a big deal about financial support, because that's not what we want to be. And we agreed on that early on. We don't want to be a nagathon.
Yeah.
But we did have somebody who did sign up to provide us a monthly subscription.
Thank you.
We won't use the name because we don't have permission, but You know who you are, and we thank
you
you very much. Yes, absolutely. But it did prompt me to want to talk about that because, there's this thing called value for value that's going through podcasting right now for a lot of folks. And it's basically based on the proposition that if you are getting something of value from a particular podcast, whether it's information, whether it's fun, or whatever it is, that's some value you're getting from them. And it's not inappropriate for the podcaster to ask for some value in return. And so all we're asking is that you consider subscribing or providing us with a donation as you feel is appropriate. Our monthly expenses for bringing you this podcast run typically $50 a month on months where we have longer episodes and we have more time involved because they all charge on time. The hosting service, the recording service that we use, they all charge based on how much time you use. It's kind of like your cell phone. You buy this package, and if you go over, you got to pay more for the next package up. So we have months where it goes over that. And then we have about $20 a year for the SteeleWatching.com domain. So we've got some money invested in this, not to mention the equipment and other things that we've purchased. So we're not asking you to make us rich. We're just asking you to consider helping with some of the costs so that we can continue to bring you this. We're not going to stop doing it, but it's going to help us bring it to you. And we would definitely appreciate it if you would consider doing that. And also on the website, besides the links to donations, we will have links so that you can follow the podcast, links to the official Steele Watching Facebook group, Twitter, Instagram, and a link to the Steele Watchers fan group on Facebook.
Join us.
Yes.
It's interesting. We've had a lot of people joining lately, and I don't want to assume it's all us because that would be maybe wrong, but I've wondered. I mean, okay, so here's my question for anyone listening. How many of you who have joined recently or semi-recently heard the podcast first and then joined versus how many found the Facebook group on their own? I'm just curious because it would be nice to know.
Yeah.
Looking for the ego boost.
Yeah. So if you are listening to this and you do decide to join the Facebook group, just maybe mention it at some time so that, we can have an idea of whether we're making an impact on the group or not.
Because it's cool if we can reciprocate with the group, to bring people in and then to provide the podcast and the fan community and all that stuff. Like it's become really, really active, and it was always active, but it's become especially active in the last little while, and that's been awesome to see. I'm not always able to comment, and I comment maybe more than you do, but I'm usually running around like checking my phone. Oh, somebody posted this. Oh, somebody posted this, and I'm like not always able to join in on the conversations because I'm chasing after a 7-year-old. But it's so cool to see them.
Yeah. Well, as I've commented before, I'm not really much on social media, so I don't participate as much as you do. But the one thing I'll say about the group is that they have been very kind to us.
So kind.
And very supportive of us.
Yeah.
They let us get away with murder because this is a show about murder. But I mean, we post stuff about the podcast in the group, and they've been very generous. And so thank you to the admins of that group for their graciousness. And so just, it would be nice if we knew that we were having a positive impact on the group. So there we go.
Yay.
Yeah.
All right. Next episode coming up is Steele Framed.
You want to trade? I'll trade you this episode for one episode.
Oh, what does come after? Steele at any price? Oh,
it doesn't matter. Just pick an episode. I'll trade you. We'll
now
get
you
into
can do it. You're gonna crush it.
Okay, fine.
It'll be awesome. It'll be great.
We'll talk about it.
It'll be great.
So, all right. Well, I've got nothing else.
No, me either. Thanks for listening.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.